Hi, this is Jeffrey Wernick, and I'm here, of course, with both Bruce and Ryan. This day, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have an opening where I'll make some opening comments and we'll make some opening statements, but also during the course of this, I don't know why this is. Bruce and Ryan. Oh, wow. Can heck with myself. And I would like to then go to the comments of the questions that people have asked in the so we can make this kind of like a town hall experience where people who either submit questions in advance of these regular Monday fine points or people who are watching live get the opportunity of asking questions and we'll try and get to everyone's questions so we make this participatory in nature.
Can I one thing really quick, Jeffrey? Those in the chat, share the link out. Share the link, get people to watch it. That way we can have more of a conversation in the chat, and we'll look forward to addressing your questions. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for that comment there, Ryan. So I wanted to just start off with a statement regarding Trump, his personality, and no King's Day. So I think I'm going to try and constantly remind people of who Trump is. Okay, I think we got a description of Trump, which he never got on the stand and testified to refute when they had the case related to Stormy Daniels. There was an accusation made. The guy from the, I guess it was the National Enquirer, the publisher, the president of the publisher, Pecker, I think his name is, last name, testified that basically Michael Cohen was feeding false stories about Trump's opponents to the National Enquirer. It was alleged, and without ever being refuted, to my knowledge, never refuted under oath, that Trump directed Cohen to do this. And it was basically when Trump seems to have been concerned about stories coming out with respect to what were allegations towards his predatory neighbor, predatory behavior, towards women. So he decided that, so it seems like he was looking to disparage those he thought as his greatest challengers. In some cases, it was Cruz, and there was accusation linking his father or something to the Oswald and the Kennedy assassination. So basically, what the allegations were, the testimony was at the trial, is that Trump instructed Cohen to work with National Enquirer to post stories that they all knew were false stories. And then Trump would then go out at the rallies and on debates, refer to the stories that it seems like he in fact planted and that he knew were false, but cited those articles as being valid authorities in nature, so that he could then destroy the reputation of others. And what Trump says is that he would do anything to win. Okay, knowing the fact that Trump would do anything and say anything to win, as we think we have examples that basically no court has found credible yet, of zones being, cities being war ravaged and war zones, some of the adjectives, he's used to describe these locations. And the fact that we've now seen a whole lot of judges who, when they've asked the people from the lawyers representing the Trump administration to provide evidence of claims they're making, they're either withdrawing them, they're acknowledging they don't really have anything. Some are making false statements that they then back away from. And they've left a lot of judges incredulous. So what do we know about Trump? What we know about Trump is, to get what he wants, he will say anything. Okay, he has no regard for the truth. He only has regard for getting exactly what he wants. Okay, the way he wants it, when he wants it. Okay, he has an authoritarian mentality. He expects that he's going to get whatever he wants all the time, and he expects the people around him, in this case, whether it's his cabinet members, agency heads, anyone as an administration and Justice Department, or any of the department, is that he expects them to do what he wants them to do. with having the same disregard for the truth as he has. Okay, so he expects them to do the dirty work on his behalf. Okay, so we got to clear every agent on the Trump administration now is someone who's expecting to represent him, represent his interests, do whatever he wants to get the objective he wants, and they're not supposed to question anything. And does he care whether they're breaking the law or not? Well, we've already seen a number of lawyers who have done exactly that, who have been disbarred for doing exactly what Trump has asked them to do without regard to whether it's illegal or not, without regard to their reputation. And clearly, these are people who don't care about their reputation because, they're prepared to do that to demonstrate their fealty, their loyalty, their subordination to him. Okay. So why any court? I like to say if people lie a lot, okay, it doesn't mean everything they say is a lie. But if they have a disregard for the truth, okay, then if they have a disregard for the truth, why should you ever give them the benefit of the doubt that anything they say is truthful? That doesn't mean everything they say is a lie, but it means that the burden of proof is on them to prove it's the truth. Okay, that's when someone who's a serial liar, okay, then you must assume that everything they say is a lie until they bring the evidence. So for them, they should have a presumption of guilt because that's the reputation they've established because they have a complete disregard for the truth. So really, I don't understand how any court could give deference to this president, okay, who has a complete disregard for the truth and who has a demonstrated disregard for the truth, and the evidence that they have accessible to them that he has complete disregard to truth, that they get reminded of almost every single day, okay? There should never be deference to him. I don't think James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington said, we believe if you have a tyrant, a demagogue in the White House who has no regard for the truth whatsoever, that the obligation of Congress is to bend the knee, okay? And the obligation is the courts is because he or she has the title of the president, that you always defer to them. And this is what the founding fathers had in mind, okay? The founding generation, I should say. I don't know who really can believe that, okay? And I think now now we go to the No King's Day, which basically the administration has described as all Antifa, okay? And how did the administration through its press secretary described who Democrats are? I think what were her terms, that they either were members of Hamas or supporters of Hamas, or illegal immigrants, or insurrectionists, and that they all hate America. Okay, I gotta constantly remind people, and this is what Bruce and Ryan we always do every week. The American nation was founded on an act of insurrection against the king. That was the money. And how did they do it? They add their grievances, and when their grievances were ignored, they said, "You're no longer relevant to our life." Okay, we've made our grievances. We've told you over and over again. You've deprived us of our inalienable rights, so we no longer acknowledge that you rule us. Okay, that was the Declaration of Independence. Okay. That was the Declaration of Independence, and that supposedly is what's supposed to celebrate next year. Is exactly that act, an act of rebellion, an act of insurrection, an act of rebellion, insurrection against tyranny. Okay, that is our obligation. That was what I expected of us, and it was peaceful. People didn't take up arms. No, the British took up arms to stop this, and people decided to say, no, you're not legitimate, and we're not acknowledging you, and you're now using force for us to acknowledge your power, your rule over us. No, you can't use your force to get us to obey you. Okay, we're not accepting the fact that that it's a legitimate use of force. Is that you have disrespected our inalienable rights, and now you're not going to use weapons to oppose it on us. We reject it, and we're going to defend ourselves against you attempting to do that. Okay. So that was Bruce. I guess you might want to say something. Is that what you're?
No. I mean, I would just add this, Jeffrey, that the whole foundation of the Declaration is government by the consent of the governed, right? government by the consent of the government. And the colonists had no representation in Parliament. We hadn't given our consent through legislative bodies or otherwise to anything that the British were doing. Said, well, fine, we're going our own way then. You've tried to reduce us to serfs on a plantation or vassalage without any authority whatsoever. And therefore, we are exercising our inherent, unalienable right to govern ourselves. And that's how we went forward. I mean, the great irony, Jeffrey and Ryan, is that, well, the Trump people were deploring any aspersion on kings. They forget, who are we fighting against? King George III. If you examine the 27 grievances in the Declaration, they're all lodged against one individual, a king, King George III. We don't respect you. And now it's said that if you disrespect kings, you're being un-American. No, that's being as American as apple pie. It really is strange that the Trump people now think it's American in order to celebrate kingship. And that shows how far we've come.
Well, I'll add, though, that, and I'm sure we're going to get into the No Kings protest in depth, but, from my perspective, it's interesting to see how different the view is of what everyone's discussing in the conversation. And this is what I keep talking about in regard to how the media spheres, the mainstream alternative media and the mainstream, sort of create false impressions of what everyone's saying, and it doesn't really represent the majority. My opinion is, I think it's obvious that the majority of average people, this is the way I see it, I could be wrong, think that this is about calling out a fast track towards authoritarian consolidation of power or a king or whatever, right? That's what we are seeing. We're seeing, whether Biden or Trump, we're seeing this, and they may see it only in Trump, but it's a continuation of the consolidation of power, of what would eventually lead to some sort of king situation. And so having a No Kings protest in many people's minds is not saying we have a king. Maybe they think that, but it's saying we do not believe we should have that kind of power building. And I think what's interesting is at the right sort of turned it into, well, we don't have a king, so that doesn't make any sense, even though that's a ridiculous way to frame it. But at the same time, arguing, some people seeing it, and again, maybe this is what's happening and I'm missing it, that people are saying, no, we should have a king, and that's the way it should be. It's interesting how many different categories of this conversation there are.
Let me tell you why I disagree with what you're saying. Obviously, every president looks to expand executive power the most they can, okay? But it's been unique to Trump, okay? Only Trump has said, okay, the Constitution says I have absolute power.
Yeah, we all agree.
And not only do I have absolute power, it's not only absolute, it's not subject to review, okay? So I don't recall Biden ever saying, I got absolute power to do whatever I want, and whatever I try and do, nobody has the right to review it, okay? Biden never said that. Obama never said that, okay? So that statement of that interpretation of the Constitution, okay, that the president has absolute power, okay. What is a monarchy? And what does Trump make? And what does Trump represent? Trump represents that his power is sort of somewhat divine in nature. Trump's arguments and justification for his claims are no different than what monarchs, tyrants, and despots. I'm here as your divine representation. God ordained me for this position, okay? And I'm representing, supposedly your best interests. God thinks so. I think so. So, and many of you should think exactly that way. And my power, again, it's absolute. I can do, the Article 2 gives me the right to do anything I want. Okay.
We all agree on that. Can I clarify?
And the court has no right to review it. Once I say it, that's it. Okay. So what more rule can be more totalitarian than that? Where somebody gets into an office, says they can do whatever they want, and no one, Congress, the American people, or the courts have any ability to contest what that president does. How do you
Bruce, let me jump in again.
That statement, right?
Because this is just to clarify. I maybe it was taken as me saying that they're different. That what Trump's doing is obviously an escalation beyond everyone before it. But, and I, just to be clear, I wasn't arguing that he's not. My point was that everyone views it differently. I didn't even express my opinion yet, is that everyone seems to see this as slightly different. And I agree with everything you just said. I think we're all in agreement that this is a fast track towards exactly that, which is why I think the protest makes sense to say we protest that, whether or not you view it as a king. My point was only to say that I think most of it's much more nuanced than that, and saying we see that's where it's going. So to argue that it's dumb that we protest when there's not a king, I'm just pointing out that's a stupid argument in regard to, even if they thought that, it obviously is a logical thing. But I agree with you, Jeffrey. I
take reservation. The idea that we're headed towards monarchy, we've already passed that by leaps and bounds. There are scores of people who are dead now because Trump said, I decide if you're an enemy of the United States, can exterminate you without due process on my say-so alone. I don't need any facts. Okay, I send the military, they destroy you, and there's no limiting principle. He starts out with alleged drug traffickers. Who knows? Then people who were marching on the weekend. He said, now you're an enemy. You're invading the United States.
Exactly.
This is more than alarming. You know, this is exactly the kind of limitless power that was asserted by the chancellor in the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. And remember, and I want to go back so that the audience recognizes why this is really, really alarming and it's going to take us back, to antediluvian days. There's a principle of justice that is like 500 years or older. No man or institution can be a judge in his own case, right? You can't be a judge in your own case. The principle that Trump is urging is I get to decide whether I've violated the law. Whoever would ever accept that, Could you imagine a system of justice where you're accused of a crime? You march in and say, Your Honor, I get to decide whether I'm guilty or not, right? How much law would there be? There'd be no guilty verdicts ever. We don't trust anybody, any institution to be a judge in their own case. That is the whole idea of judicial review, an impartial judge, not judging their own handiwork. And all of experience teaches you can't trust somebody to evaluate their own handiwork. Everybody would get A+ in school if they wrote their own test scores, right? That doesn't work. And that's why this idea of Trump or the executive branch saying nobody else to review what I do is truly frightening, because there are no limits. We know what's going to happen. You think he's going to convict himself of a crime? He's going to say, oh, yeah, I did X, and now I understand it's illegal. He's never going to say that. No one ever has. And that's why it is so alarming to see these statements out of the White House that have no limiting principle. And they say, if actually acted upon, means truly the end of the republic that began on July 4, 1776. All of their sacrifices in vain. And we're going to sit here and accept that? All their sacrifices far beyond anything Mr. Trump has ever done. Those who signed their death warrants on July 4, 1776, Valley Forge, anyway, we know all the sacrifices that were required. So in order for even people like us in our audience to have the opportunity to speak and think, to have arguments based upon facts and debate without worrying that we're going to go to the Bastille or something like that, if the government doesn't like what we say. And how can we idle with such staggering issues at stake as returning to pre-July 4, 1776?
And another frustrating response that you get from, I think, Vice President or the government in many different accounts on Twitter shared this point going, well, we have a day, it's called July 4th. We do it then. It's like, so what? We're not supposed to protest until that day. And if they're taking there's such illogical arguments flying around. I think it speaks to exactly what you're both saying. That this is obviously logical, like where this moment, and let's also point out, does that mean that there's no political manipulation? Of course not. That always exists, but it doesn't mean that this is not a valid response. What's happening is authoritarian. It is a consolidation of power. And I think left and right, most people do see that, but there's just so many opinions and personalities just clouding the conversation by design, I think.
Yeah, but I go back with regard to the language, Ryan, and that is, it's just not a concentration of power. This is dictatorship, indistinguishable from Xi or Putin.
Yeah. No, I don't agree with you guys. I'm just saying in a broad way, because there are people that have different opinions, and I think it's fair to keep it more broad. But trust me, I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, speaking about language, let's first show. I see you have the Carolyn Levitt one.
Yeah, that's the one on the right.
Party's main constituency are made up of Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals.
God, that's just so crazy.
Okay, so basically, we had about 75 million people voted for Kamala Harris in 2024. So she's just described basically about 75 million, 49% of those that voted. Her allegations are that that's who they are. Okay.
Criminals, essentially, in essence.
That's a complete dehumanization and demonization of anyone that disagrees with you. Okay, that's a reflection of how they think. This is not a disagreement over ideas. It's not a disagreement on governance. It's not a disagreement, on anything related to policy differences. This is just a complete demonization and linking people. Why? They're doing this basically, to intimidate people and to justify their acts of aggression by first, how do you justify an act of aggression, violence against people? The first thing you need to do is demonize them and dehumanize them. So once you get to the point where you successfully have demonized and then dehumanized them, then people have become anesthetized to committing acts against people they no longer believe are really human. Okay, so this is the intent. It's not like this is a one and done thing. This is a strategy, okay, where they're implementing, is from what they call the flood the zone, right? They keep flooding the zone with this bullshit, okay? It's a way of wearing down resistance against these words. They want these words to be the words that when anybody thinks of Democrat, that therefore they're either Hamas, they're an illegal immigrant, they're a violent criminal, they're Antifa, and they're basically what they are is a domestic terrorist. This is where we're going. Dissenters are domestic and terrorists.
Yeah, and I want to point out, Jeffrey, and Ryan, we've seen this rodeo before. It's the Third Reich. They started with the Jews, dehumanizing them, right? The Nuremberg laws, they stripped them of citizenship. They couldn't occupy any professions, Kristallnacht and whatever. That was the run-up, if you will, to the Holocaust. So we know that this is how they do things. That's what we saw the same kind of thing in the Soviet Union. Well, the kulaks, they're all bad kulaks. The starvation, the genocide in Ukraine, the kulaks are all being destroyed, tens of millions. Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, Pol Pot, if you knew how to read, you're inhuman and you got slaughtered. We know where this is going. They're going to ultimately target us unless we push back and say no. They're going to strike anybody who dissents is going to be said you're a domestic terrorist. They're just pushing it slowly and surely. And I say that is exactly how Hitler operated in the Third Reich. The Holocaust didn't happen the day after he became chancellor in January 1933. Right. It was, it's like 8 or 9 years down the road. But we know where it is headed. And you're reluctant, obviously, to use the Nazi analogies, but it fits like a glove in this particular situation. And I'm certain that there probably will be, under Trump, a proposal to strip people of citizenship if they dissent. That's going to happen for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and you can point out the other examples from our government as well, or even just Israel and Gaza and the way they're treating the Palestinians. This is very, very common. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah. Well, if you look at how they described the protest, okay, as what they called it a hate America day. Okay, so they called it hate America. People protesting against an authoritarian president who actually is trying to whose claims to power are actually greater and more absolute than most monarchs claimed. Okay, and then people say that this is a constitutionally respectful president, and that the people who are protesting hate America. And who are they comprised of? According to, if you listen to the Trump administration, everyone out there who marched, the almost 7 million people that marched, okay, throughout the country, and I guess in other cities in the world as well, they are Antifa. They hate America. They love Hamas. They're violent criminals. A lot of illegal aliens out there as well, and they're communists and socialists and Marxists. Okay, everyone out there, okay, it can be described by that according to the Trump administration. Now let's look at what the Trump really thinks about Americans who believe in protest, which is, in my opinion, the greatest act of patriotism is protest, dissent. Okay.
So Trump posted this on his Truth Social for those watching. AI generated, I believe. Yeah, obviously.
Okay, now this is something apparently Trump and MAGA finds humorous. A plane loaded up with shit and the president shitting on the American people. This is what he thinks. Okay, he doesn't respect their opinion. He doesn't want to listen to their opinion. He doesn't want to understand their frustrations. He doesn't want to legitimize not only their ideas as human beings, he rejects them as human beings. Okay, you don't shit on a human being. This is his attitude towards the American people. This is his attitude towards anyone who is not sycophantic to him, that he's just prepared to shit on them. Okay, really, that was so appropriate, that thing, because that is who he is. Okay, you don't kiss up to Trump, he's going to shit on you. Okay, people ought to remember that. Okay, that usually in most humor there's an element of truth to it. So when he puts the crown on and puts the thing up there, okay, you understand there's an element of truth. And that reflects his attitude, okay? He wants to shit on anyone and everyone that disagrees with him, okay? So, and the people in the government, who I'll quote, loyal to him, they don't want to be shit upon. So they have to just do whatever he tells them to do, and to stay in good standing with him. That's what they got to do. They got to do anything, say anything to preserve their good standing with him. So this is just I think it's outrageous, and it's outrageous that people look at that and think it's funny. It's outrageous that people see their neighbors, their friends, go out on the street, okay, to sit back and say we're concerned about our country today, and people think that because they express a concern that they have, that they hate the country. That they're a socialist, that are Marxist, they're a communist, okay? They're a threat, they're a domestic terrorist, a threat to national security, or an illegal immigrant, or Hamas, or a violent criminal. And that's how people are describing other people, just for the fact of having a disagreement on policies, on thinking that maybe the immigration policy could be, more humane. Maybe they should only focus on getting rid of people who are actually violent criminals, and not people who, have been in the country for, a long period of time and outside of coming in undocumented, they've never committed any other crime subsequent, any other felony subsequent to, coming across being undocumented, that maybe there's a more humane solution. It doesn't have to be amnesty. People could pay fines. People could have some cost associated with coming across undocumented. So it's not like a complete forgiveness, but it doesn't have to be the death sentence of I don't care if you were here 50 years. I don't care if you went to fight in Iraq for the country. I don't care whatever you did for all the time you've been here. We're going to give you no credit for that. There are no mitigating circumstances. We're going to hunt you down. We're going to profile people. If we find a whole bunch of citizens and throw them in jail and detain them and throw them to the ground, okay, and pepper spray them, that's okay along the way, okay, because we're making America safe, okay?
Yeah.
And I love the Insurrection Act, is kind of what Trump said, because it's a way we can fight crime, okay? It's not really an insurrection. It's now, this is not, his claim is that the purpose of the Insurrection Act was to fight crime, okay? That's the allegation. And because he says it's an Insurrection Act and he calls it an Insurrection Act, that's not reviewable. So if he says there's an insurrection, nobody can question his criteria of what is an insurrection is. And so anything could be an insurrection. If one
that's what I call, Ryan and Jeffrey, once you debase the language where a word means whatever you want it to mean, it's beyond any range that any lexicographer would believe is rational. You cannot have rule of law anymore, because whatever rule you lay down would be interpreted by Mr. Trump to mean the opposite of what you say. You know?
Right.
So you can't have rule of law in this cultural degradation. I also point out the great irony, if you will, of trying to equate dissent with being un-American. We were formed as a nation, and we're celebrating the likes of Voltaire, who famously said, "I may disagree with you, but I'll risk my life to defend your right to say it." The Boston Tea Party, dissent was the heart and soul of our Declaration of Independence, our formative years as a new country. We had protests against the stamp tax, and British repealed it. We continued to protest, and the British then turned a deaf ear, and that caused us ultimately to move towards independence. But the idea that dissent is unpatriotic, un-American, it turns even our history on its head. The very famous lines in Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural, where he says, we are all Republicans, we're all Democrats, we're all Federalists, because although we may have differences of opinion, we don't have a difference of principle. And we accept disagreement because we feel like John Milton and Areopagitica, that truth and falsehood on an even playing field, ultimately, truth will prevail. That's the heart and soul of what it means to be a self-governing people. Anybody can make an error. That's why you have free speech. And this idea that I think the Trump people have is, no, all you do is whatever you say is true because you wave a wand, even if it runs contrary to fact. And therefore, thinking is no longer Quran anymore. It's outdated. There's a gospel out there. They've come across the gospel and stopped thinking anymore. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything more antediluvian and opposite of free speech.
Can I might have missed some of the things you said. I cut out there for a second. I apologize about that. But before we get too far past it, Jeffrey, to add to your first point, if you want to bring up the screen share, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. And as you do, I definitely agree with what at least I caught from what Jeffrey said and what Bruce added. But I think it's important to point out that I don't think this is unique to only one side of the paradigm. I think it's getting more intense right now. I would argue that what's happening now would have happened regardless of left or right administration. I think this is with a government agenda. We may disagree on that. But here's what's interesting. To add to the point you're making. So with everything they said, we all agree it's dehumanization. The people have a right to protest. But let's just say it had been wildly violent. They could have made an argument that there's something to it, right? The reality, cut to the chase, even from Grok on Twitter, Republican controlled and updated. In summary, while Republican figures, Trump, Vance, preemptively labeled the October protest as hate America events, just like they did in July, which was the same outcome, the reality was the opposite, a massive, orderly exercise of free speech. Don't you love that coming from Grok of all places? And I just think that's just my other page. I just think that's important to point out. So on top of everything, there wasn't even any violent responses. And we can get into the claims they're making about that. But I just, this needs to be kind of an awakening moment for a lot of the Republicans that may just believe somehow that these are being done for right reasons. You're being misled. And I am still of the mind that there's enough, more than not, I would argue, people that are lost in this and think for whatever reason this is the right path. Wake up, because you're being played.
I disagree with you.
I know you guys do.
One of the reasons why I disagree, I think like the evidence is, if you take a look at, the other video I shared with you, that maybe we can look at the person being pepper sprayed. You want to?
Yeah. Let's watch
that up.
Yeah, this is incredible. I mean, this gave me a physically. I was, yeah, and there's more than one of these, by the way. So this is the one Nick Sorter shared.
Fucking stupid. You're actually fucking stupid. We're gonna body check him because his megaphone.
Who is talking to you? No. Hey, this is the line that they created.
And they're cheering this.
I can't breathe out! Quick! We have some shit. I can't breathe! Where's the news? The news left, my bitches! I can't get in! I told y'all, you faggot bitches!
People can die from that.
I can't get air! I can't get air! Help, please!
Yeah, I'm gonna.
So if you want to bring up the screen share, I can show you what this is. This is the part that really kills me.
But and I'll put it up right now. But the point is, people celebrated this. Okay, people. So I don't know how much confidence you have in people who see an act of violence. All these people say, "I believe in the free speech. I believe in free speech." What do you have? She's in a public street. Okay, she's in a place that she has a right to be. She's doing nothing illegal. She's talking to this person. And this person says, no, you're not a citizen. You're a piece of garbage. I'm going to pepper spray you. Okay. That's assault. Okay. Yeah. She was assaulted by these people, and people think it's okay that assaulted because they didn't like what she was saying. So I guess that's the criteria now for the MAGA people, is that anyone who goes in front of a police and says something that they think is appropriate, that there's a right of the police to assault them. This is our view. I don't place much faith in people who can enjoy something like this.
Right.
Okay. Really, I don't care whether she was saying things inappropriate enough. She was exercising her free speech rights. Okay. You should not be subject to assault for exercising your free speech rights. And that's what these free speech advocates are now approving of, is somebody engaging in free speech and being subject to assault by people in the government, and that the people in government, and they're laughing and they're enjoying, and they think the government should do more of this to more people. And they think, and the comments were that they should, many people commented that they think people should be even more aggressive than this. Okay. Yeah. That they shouldn't stop with the pepper spray. Okay. Where does this mentality come from? Okay.
Dehumanization, like we were just talking about.
Yeah. And I want to comment as well about, the level of hypocrisy. I go back, I live on Capitol Hill. And I walk across Congressional Plaza every day to my offices near the Capitol. And there were repeated demonstrations that the Trump people had, the MAGA people had on the Congressional Plaza and over at the Supreme Court, which is across the street. This was the spring and the summer before the election in 2020. Many of them carried Confederate flags. They're often vulgarities, things of that sort, but they were peaceful. And I walked across and said, okay, didn't agree with things, but I said, you have a right to be here. That's what it means to be American. You can denounce Biden or anybody else. And there wasn't anyone in these crowds, Jeffrey and Ryan, who were arrested, who were beaten, pepper sprayed. They had an opportunity, that has a right to voice opposition to the Democrats or Biden. And they largely were peaceful protests. But they exercised free speech and they enjoyed it. They didn't ever confront pepper spray, you could understand why someone carrying a Confederate flag, could think that Grant surrendered to Lee at Appomattox Courthouse. And that's a little disturbing. But no, you can carry Confederate flags in the United States, just like you can burn the American flag too. That's part of freedom of speech. And then to turn around, and now when they have the power, they want to deny everyone else the same right that they enjoyed in spades when they were protesting Biden's candidacy and supporting Trump. They have a right to support Trump. Anything that's peaceful, you argue on the merits, you have your billboards. But I can guarantee you what you just showed this audience never happened to them on Capitol Hill. And this was 6, 7, 8 demonstrations.
Well, I mean, I think there's some examples we can include, but let's just be clear. This is further and more consistent and more in your face than I've ever seen. And I was just watching examples of same. And I think Nick or Loomer or Laura Loomer, Benny Johnson, like they're out there just clapping and cheering and F around and find out, where they'll be sitting there in the street on their knees. Like they're making a point. I'm sure you guys have seen the articles, for example, where they're wearing like, blow up cartoon costumes, like trying to be like, look, you're going to call us terrorists. We're going to make you guys look ridiculous, but they're on their knees, literally going like, look, we're here legally protesting. And they just rush up to them and push them to the ground. They're all cheering about it. And it's because of what we just said. And I don't know whether the Knicks of the world, really care whether there's justification, just want to dunk on the Democrats. But a lot of people are just, well, they're terrorists. Trump, the government said they're terrorists. And it's the same mentality they've used on Americans to justify killing overseas for a very long time. It's just, we need to realize this is coming home right now. Wherever you think it's coming from, this is the worst of what we've been, ignoring for a long time. That's now coming right to our front door. And I think it's going to continue well past Republic and whatever, left, right paradigm position is in control.
Yeah. James Madison understood that. By the way, the audience needs to know Madison was the father of the Constitution. He said, instruments of power initially created, to fight or to deter enemies abroad, come home always to destroy liberty at home. You can't keep these tactics and these theories, into the international domain. It comes back, and that's what we see right now. We got assassination squads out there. There's nothing that suggests Trump can't move his killings now of those he says are drug traffickers in Caribbean areas. Says, well, what's the difference between killing them on U.S. land? In terms of your power, you call them an enemy of the United States, beginning, end of case, kill them. And that is where we are in terms of their theory. I think the only resistance that Trump confronts now is political resistance, not legal resistance. There's some people that maybe not quite willing to go that far. He doesn't know whether there's some who may not obey an illegal order to kill a clearly American citizen who's maybe selling marijuana or fentanyl or something, who having the military or drop a bomb on them. But we're inching that close every single day. And there is nobody in his administration that is willing to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that. There are no Sir Thomas Moores, for sure. Everyone is there and they say, how high you want us to jump, we'll jump, no matter what you say. And you'll notice also, when you remember some of the confirmation hearings of his chief cabinet members, when they asked repeatedly, the Democrats did, well, would you disobey an illegal order, flagrantly unconstitutional order? The uniform response, which was rehearsed, was, well, he'll never do that, right? You remember? Oh, he'll never order me to do that. He is ordering you to do that. And the reason why you did not make a commitment, because you know he's going to comply.
It's clearly they committed perjury.
He said.
It's clearly they knew he would ask that of them, and it's clear that they knew that they would obey it.
Yeah.
And it's clear to me that they committed perjury. And I think anyone who doesn't believe that, I mean, I can understand people saying I could justify them. I mean, I don't agree with that, but at least I could have some respect to say I can justify them perjuring themselves. But then they shouldn't be so upset about supposedly the perjury claims they think Comey has made. So, but I don't really think. I wonder how many people really believed that when they were saying that, they really believed that they meant what they were saying. Okay?
I think you made a good point, Jeffrey. I think the way that they said it kind of proved that they very much knew that was what was going to happen. That's just,
and I think almost everybody watching it knows that was not the case. But they'll excuse that perjury. Okay, that's a perjury that was okay because that's a perjury that produced a good outcome for them. So a perjury that produces a good outcome for people is a good perjury. Okay, so good perjury is good. Okay, so it's not that perjury is bad; it's that good perjury is good and bad perjury is bad. And I'm going to make the point because I selected some quotes from a former justice of the Supreme Court, Robert Jackson, Supreme Court justice of some repute, of some renown. And normally I like to quote Brandeis because I think Brandeis is the best one to quote, but I think I chose some from Robert Jackson I'd like to share with people. With the law books filled with a great assortment of crimes, a prosecutor stands a fair chance of finding at least a technical violation of some act on the part of almost anyone. In such a case, it is not a question of discovering the commission of a crime and then looking for the man who has committed it. It is a question of picking the man and then searching the law books or putting investigators to work to pin some offense on him. So I think it's pretty clear that what the Trump administration is doing, the Department of Injustice is doing, what Pam Bondi is doing, what Kash Patel is doing, what all those cast of characters are doing, is exactly what Robert Jackson warned against, is picking the man and then searching the books, putting investigators to work to pin some offense on that person, okay? Also, Robert Jackson, in our country are evangelists and zealots of many different political, economic, and religious persuasions whose fanatical conviction is that all thought is divinely classified into two kinds, that which is their own and that which is false and dangerous, okay? That is the rhetoric of this administration. It is the rhetoric of Trump. It's the rhetoric of all his administration. It's the rhetoric of Mike Johnson, okay? It's the rhetoric of the MAGA influences, okay? Those that are actively engaged in social media. That's exactly their rhetoric, okay? Divine classification, okay, of conviction. It's either their own or everything else is false and dangerous that isn't theirs, okay? That's basically the lack of dialogue we have in this country, is that I'm right and everything you say is false and dangerous. You're a domestic terrorist, and we know what should be done to domestic terrorists.
Jeffrey, I just want to remind, your first quote was spoken when Robert Jackson was then Attorney General. It was 1940, before he was appointed to the High Court. And with regard to the second quote, the beginning of civilization was when one person reflected, I could be wrong. I need to hear alternate views. That was the beginning of civilization. It was the beginning of wisdom. It was the beginning of knowledge. That humility. I could be wrong. I need to listen. This is an effort to go back to pre-civilization era. That's exactly what this
excellent
is.
point.
Don't think anymore.
Yeah.
This is how dangerous this is. I always get up in the morning and say, Bruce, you could be wrong. Listen. You may be convinced, may not be, but you got to listen because you're not infallible. No one is infallible. Keep always questioning yourself, and that's how the human beings are able to make progress, become civilized. That there's out there, that there's the gospel, even though it's anonymous and nobody knows where it is, and there's no facts to support the gospel, but you believe it anyway. And that's really Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon, one or the other.
I have an interesting thought that Jeffrey had pointed to a second ago that you just kind of brought together for me there, Bruce, that, I wanted to comment on this anyway about, you mentioned flooding the zone. I believe that started with Bannon, but I'm not sure. But I think the point was kind of just, it was very clearly outlined by him, by the way, that we should flood the zone, like the political conversation, with so much the things that I take that he knows are false, right? Like inherently misleading things. Like, for example, for all we know, it may end up being real, like we've seen from a lot of Trump stuff, but he'll be, running again in 2028 kind of a thing. Now, I think it's important to think about that the objective there for them is to sort of flood as much things in front of you as possible. So in one way, we don't know what to look at, what's real, or many people just kind of check out and don't get involved anymore. But it kind of goes to that same point there, Bruce, that if every single day you don't even know what to begin to look at, there's so much nonsense, it kind of like drives a level of apathy. Like it drives you to no longer pay attention, almost kind of a preempting point to what you just said there. But I just wanted to flesh that out. That point of flooding the zone, I think, is a huge part of what we deal with right now, where there'll be something really obvious happening. Like, let's just take the constitutional crisis we can all see, and then they'll dump ridiculous like there was a drones and fog and all these weird things that were spinning through our social media for a while like that. Those are the kind of things I think are spun into the conversation so people get distracted by it. Just wanted to point that out. If you guys had comments.
What I think it is, and again, part of the blame is on the media too, and on the species. They get preoccupied, with the fleas, and they turn fleas into elephants, and then you throw enough fleas out there, and every day, it's the sky is falling down, and they just trying to deflect attention from one illegality by doing 5 other illegalities and things of that sort. That's why you have to go. I mean, with regard to Trump, and I do this with regard to anything the government says, I really don't pay attention to anything they say because I don't believe any of it. I say to see what you do. I understand institutions, but so what? Why do I believe anything that you say is have any relationship to reality? It doesn't. You're not a cerebral person. You're a hormonal person, and that everybody in government. I assume that is true until proven otherwise. But the reason why I think this, flood the zone, whatever works, is because people are willing to take their eye off the ball. I don't. I'm just looking at the power institutions, the principles at stake. That's why if you stick with the institutions and principles, there's a self-correcting element to them. Limitless power, infinite power. There's no correction at all until you're off the precipice and we're all destroyed.
The more noise there is, the more noise you create, to find the truth, to try knowledge embedded in noise becomes more and more difficult if you keep proliferating noise. Okay. It means searching for the truth becomes more difficult.
Right.
So I think that's ultimately their goal, is to frustrate people by just lying so much about so many different things, that as you're disproving one lie, there's 1,000 other lies emerging, and they keep popping up with the knowledge that many people will believe those lies. Okay. So I think I saw one news report where someone says, like, when Trump thought that really Portland was war ravaged, that he probably saw that in a Fox story, that they showed videos from the protests in the George Floyd protests that were 4 or 5 years ago, and they kept re-showing those protests, and there you did see violence and burning, and they showed that as if it was occurring today. And there was also evidence that some people were posting stuff that actually was not even in the United States, that was elsewhere, and they were posting that. But people think that, some people are conjecturing that Trump watches that, and for him, his bubble is the real world. So what he sees, he might really believe, because that might be the only information he's getting, because that's what he sees, and nobody's going in those offices and saying, hey, you know what? That story that you saw that made you respond to, that's 4 or 5 years old. That's not today. Let me show you another video of what's really going on today. I'm sure, I would bet that nobody in the White House is doing that. I think if he has misinformation about something, okay, we saw that on TV with the person, making the claim about, Abrego, with his Garcia and whatever, and him having the tattoo, and him claiming what the tattoo was and whatever. And he just kept arguing with that person, and he called the journalist a liar, and Trump probably believed what he was saying. And he probably really thought that the journalist was telling was lying. So I think Trump was probably sincere at that moment.
I thought so too.
He really believed what he was saying, and he really, when he said, "This is why nobody trusts you," because you're saying this stuff. I think at that point Trump was actually, I believe in that moment, I think Trump was telling the truth, that that's what he believed. Now the question is, he went on national TV. He had this false belief. People around him probably knew they had this false belief, yet probably not one of them had the courage to say, "Mr. President, you're wrong, okay? Let me show you the evidence you're wrong." What does it really say about the people surrounded that not one of them probably would go to him and saying, "Don't do this on national TV. You're wrong," okay? But probably none of them did it because they're scared to do it, because, they got to sit back and say, if that's what he says, we got to say the same thing. We got to put the same bullshit out he's saying, because we got to back up his bullshit. If not, we're fired. So that's a perfect description of what this whole administration, and it comes from the top.
It speaks to who might actually be in control, it very well could be that Trump is just not aware, but it could be, that's so easy to corral somebody like that, to play on his hubris, give him false.
If you know what he's watching,
yes,
and you know what he's watching is going to influence how he thinks. You can think about the power those people have. If they know that this is his source of information, then they know what they can feed him. Okay. So
I've got a point about fake riots if you want to point that out as well. Like now this is put forward by a Democrat politician, so we should consider that it might just be maybe he's been misinformed, maybe he's making it up. But this is a weird clip, but I also have the long presentation he gave in front of Congress for like 20 minutes. But he's making the argument that Trump kind of wag the dog style faked a riot in Portland in order to justify his action. Now, to me, not just left, right, Trump. That speaks to what I've seen over my entire career doing this with the government. So it's interesting to see. But do you have a comment?
In Portland a few nights ago, and it's recorded by Oregon Public Broadcasting, was that they staged a fake riot. They marched peaceful protesters 3 blocks, and then had a line across the road. They had professional videographers behind them, and then they threw down pepper balls, flashbangs, which sound like gunfire going off, and tear gas. And of course, when you put tear gas, everybody moves, and it looks like you have some kind of a riot going on. Totally fake. This is the first time I know of, at least in my lifetime, that the federal government has faked a riot in order to try to justify, if you will, the Insurrection Act being invoked. Definitely
not the first time, in my opinion. Maybe with the Insurrection Act, but to me, that seems very valid. Like I know the event that he's talking about September, October, not further back behind that, and not that event in Dallas. What do you think?
No, false flag.
Yep,
that's par for the course.
I agree.
So this again, I go back to Nazi Germany, the burning of the Reichstag, and then you justify these emergencies by creating the emergency yourself. And certainly, there's no scruples that the Trump cabinet and administration shows that would indicate they'd have any reluctance to do that. They believe that the ends justify the means, and therefore process means nothing. And if you have to lie, cheat, and steal, then you lie, cheat, and steal to get your way. It reminds me of the Vietnam catch-22. We destroyed the village to save it. Really, we destroyed the rule of law to save it. And I say, and part of this too, I just finished reading Tim Weiner, who was a reporter who covered the intelligence community for the New York Times for a while. He's written a recent book called The Mission. To me, coming away from reading the book that's exactly what we've inculcated in the CIA. Doesn't matter, process. You can kill, lie, cheat, steal. We're saving the world for democracy by killing it at home. I said, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? We've lost all standing and influence abroad because it's so obvious now that we're so hypocritical. We're for elections, except if they result in somebody we don't like. We're for, representation, and if we don't like them, so we can overthrow Mossadegh and overthrow Arbenz and overthrow Allende in Chile and all those kinds of things. And then, wait a minute, you're telling me that yes, we are doing all these things in the name of democracy? The name of a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's why I continue to go back as my refrain. We live in an empire bubble. Long, long ago, we decided to cut a Faustian bargain and give up liberty and the rule of law to rule the world. And that's where we are. If you rule the world, you got to have a Caesar. You can't rule the world with a Sanhedrin or a collective body. And we keep pushing down that road. I said, I don't want to rule the world. I want to celebrate liberty. I want to celebrate everybody, every American have the chance to march to their own drum or whatever it is. That was the formation of this country. And we've abandoned it. Who the heck wants to vote for it? I don't want to be an empire, no. And that's certainly not what the Constitution presumes. And ultimately, but when you're empire, yeah, that's where you go. That's the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire, China, all empires are alike on that score.
Yeah, so I think that I'd like to expand on a few things that I had said previously. I think not only with respect to Trump, I think with anyone from government, the best case assumption is to assume everything they say is a lie,
yeah,
and that they have to prove everything they say is truth, and they should never be given the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
I don't want that statement to apply to just Trump. I believe that statement applies to anybody in office. Okay,
Here.
Believe absolutely nothing they say. Nothing. Okay, they should not be ever given the benefit of the doubt. We have enough evidence that they all lie. Okay,
right.
We have enough evidence that none of them respect the Constitution. We have enough evidence that we have enough evidence that they all believe that the ends justify the means. Okay, and that they have complete, utter disregard for rule of law, and they have complete, utter disregard for our inalienable rights. They have complete and utter disregard for the Constitution. And like Bruce said, what they do believe is the warfare state, okay? The U.S. empire and the warfare state, and we had enough warning from our founding generations and many people subsequent to that what gets sacrificed when you're in a constant state of war, okay? And you're living under a warfare state. What gets surrendered? Our liberty and our freedom gets surrendered. That's the cost. That's the price we pay to be constantly in a warfare state. And we're constantly in a warfare state, okay? And we're constantly committing criminal acts as a nation. I'm not talking about us, but as a nation, we're constantly committing. That's why Bruce has worked to put together, articles of impeachment against numerous presidents, is precisely for that reason. So I want to make sure that, while I think we all agree Trump is kind of unique in his claims of power, he's gone beyond the boundaries of any other president. He seems to have no boundary, where some of them had maybe some kind of boundary. He seems to be without a boundary, but that doesn't mean the principle is the fact is that protests is really all when Congress doesn't do the job, when the courts don't do the job, when the president is usurping power never contemplated by the division of powers, okay, it's up to us. So the most patriotic act is dissent, okay, in order to impose the government to respect the Constitution, okay? So it's up to us as the people. That's our that's greatest act. So anyone who does that basically says, look, it's not a matter where I agree or disagree with the policies. The matter is that everything has to be done according to the law, okay? There's a process by which things are doing. When people sit back and say, well, the tariffs are right, well, they might be right. All Trump has to do is go to Congress and say, let me explain to you why this tariff policy is great for the nation and give me the authorization to do these tariffs. That's all. What we're establishing, what Trump is trying to establish, like every other president tries to do, is that I keep testing the limits of the things I don't have to ask permission for. So I get to the point where I get to where Trump is now claiming is I don't need to ask permission of anything. Okay, so I'm not a king, but I can do whatever I want without asking anyone else's permission. And whatever people give an opinion on, their opinions are noise and irrelevant, and I don't have to honor, respect them, or obey them. Okay, because I can just do whatever I want. Okay, I'm not going to be bound by a court. I'm not going to be bound by Congress. Congress says I got to spend some money a certain way. The hell with it. Once the money's appropriated, even if it's not appropriated, I'm just going to give the checks to who I want to give the checks to, and not give the checks to who I want to give the checks to. So Congress doesn't determine how much money the government spends. It doesn't determine how it gets allocated, and it doesn't determine where the revenues come from, and it doesn't determine how money gets spent and how tariff policies. Congress doesn't do any of that. They can go through the motion, but at the end of the day, I'm going to take whatever money I have. I'll give it to Argentina. I'll give it to the military. I'll do it, but I'm going to do it all based upon my whim, and nobody can challenge what I do. Okay, so that's what we had to. We should not believe anything anyone tells us until they show us the facts. These people are terrorists where they filled up drugs and they were on the way to Miami or California, or wherever it is that they were going to go, and they were going to kill 1 million people. Apparently these boats, these several boats he's killed, apparently were selling enough drugs to kill the entire American population. Okay, because they keep throwing out these numbers of how many lives they saved by doing these, and that's all this. That's their justification. Yes, I saved a lot of lives. Believe me. Okay, that's it. There's nothing else. Okay, so they need evidence where they got the information from, who these people are. Do they have the names of the people? And even some of their own language. These people were affiliated. They had affiliation with somebody. Well, who knows what the word affiliated means? Okay, I might live in a neighborhood where my criminal might be in the neighborhood, and because we live in the same neighborhood, I'm affiliated with that person. Maybe my kid goes to the same school their kid goes to, so maybe by that I'm affiliated with that person. So they use this kind of bullshit language, okay, where they can make a claim. Oh, that person affiliated. Okay. Yes. Oh, yes. They both were at the same stadium together, watching a football game or a baseball game. So they're affiliated. They're affiliated by their interest in this particular sport and this particular team. That makes them affiliated. Okay. So they can use these words, and again, it's all the debasing of language, of using these broad terms, words that really mean anything they want it to mean. Okay, because they don't want to be precise. Because if they choose to be precise, being precise will expose their lie, will expose their bullshit.
And Jeffrey, we've seen this rodeo before. That idea crept in after 9/11. They talked about, and this is interpreting the AUMF to so-called go after Al-Qaeda. They turned and they said, well, associated forces. What the heck is an associated force? Well, it means if you have a beard, you're 18 years old, you're associated force. If you pray to Mecca, you're associated force. And there wasn't any limit to it. And that's why the AUMF has been interpreted to go way, way beyond Afghanistan, Iraq, anywhere in the world. An associated force is anybody that says anything at any time that overlaps with anything that Al-Qaeda has ever said. So again, as you point out, and I have, the debasement of the language, affiliated. These are not efforts to try to have individualized justice. It goes back to the idea of guilt by association, right, which we tried to get rid of like 500 years ago. That shows you how alarming this is. This isn't just a little movement back, 10 years, 20 years. This is centuries. It goes back to the Dark Ages. This goes back to trial by ordeal, trial by battle in terms of guilt or innocence. That's what we heard from Rudy Giuliani on January 6, 2021. Oh, trial by battle, trial by ordeal. That's how we'll determine who won the outcome of the 2020 election. Really? Now we're gonna do it by swords, and we're gonna have jousting matches to determine what's true or false. This truly is taking us back to the age of barbarism, and that's exactly what it is. That's not an exaggeration. All that counts is brute force. Yeah. Brains means nothing.
Might makes right.
Means nothing. Yeah. Might makes right. If you can get away with it, that makes it kosher. And unfortunately, that's where we are today.
And the point that we're talking about with the boats is obvious. I mean, I think we all agree this is just wildly outside of the legal reality. But I think we've also all made the point to bring it to mind to people listening that is exactly the mindset, the lens being used to go after the left. Everything we discussed, this is not some foreign terrorist organization. They're using the exact same mindset, the exact same terminology to go after American citizens. And Trump's laid out many times that Americans were on the docket, their next, yes, we'll look at American citizens too. It's just over the top. An overlap is the Chicago apartment building. Remember, they came down on their zip wires from the helicopters, and it turned out, my last report I saw, and I bet you this even diminishes, that only one of those people turned out to even be, as you said, affiliated with Tren de Aragua. And they said there was like 50, or the number they gave. I mean, women with babies with flashbangs. I mean, the way that they conducted that was insane. And that was, in my experience, one of the first very clear, like, wartime actions that I've seen in this country.
It was an act of provocation. Okay.
Yeah.
They want there to be violence. Let's be clear. Trump wants violence.
Yeah.
Miller wants violence. Because what are the things they say? You spit, we hit. You spit, we hit. They're doing their best to figure out what's the limits they can do to people so that they provoke them towards violence. They want to incite violence, okay? Because they want to use that as a pretext they want to have more video clips out there that they can have their influences spread around to justify the Insurrection Act. Okay, he wants to implement the Insurrection Act. I think the only thing that has stopped him from doing it so far is he doesn't have the evidence to justify to the courts and to the people yet. He's not been able to convince the American people that there's enough yet. I mean, his base doesn't need anything to be convinced. If he just says that, they're convinced. But he needs to convince a little larger audience than just his base. I don't think he has it. And so I think he really is doing his best to provoke acts of violence. He wants to see it. So what do? I go into a bad neighborhood, Chicago, a neighborhood that's known for some violence. I go in here and then hope that I can have video cameras show a lot of violence, and therefore then I can justify, then sending more troops in and things like that, because then I can show this video clip to the courts, and do stuff. But certainly it doesn't help the case that, yes, they arrested a whole bunch of people, and then other people they then let go, and then more they let go, and then others they made charges and dropped the charges.
Right.
So essentially, it was all based upon bullshit. So if you think back that they didn't really have anything on anyone, okay,
Right.
why did they do it? Okay, what was their goal? Their goal, in my opinion, is they wanted to provoke and incite violence.
Also, just to demonstrate action, I think, just to be like, look, we're doing it, to the base that will accept whatever they show them. It's the same kind of.
I think they want to provoke violence. I don't think.
No,
they
I
want
agree.
to
It's
show
bullshit.
it. They want to provoke violence. They're doing their best to provoke violence.
Yeah, that's obvious. But, I mean, think about
even when they're sending out these descriptions of all the Democrats, they're hoping that MAGA people will show up and that they can show the fights between them and then justify the violence. I mean, that's what I have no doubt that that's what they're hoping to do. They're using the language intentionally to provoke violence. Okay, the same type of language they used January 6th, but even uglier now. I mean, the language is much uglier than January 6th. So
it depends. It depends, Jeffrey. Remember, January 6th featured hang Mike Pence,
Yeah.
and bringing up the hangman's noose. That was and plus they were willing to do that. I have no doubt that on January 6th, if Pence was not rescued, they would have gone in and killed him. The MAGA people.
I think I saw testimony when they had the hearings on it that the Secret Service or the agents in charge of protecting him, some of them were calling family members thinking that they were going to end up being killed that day.
Yes.
So there were people, and again, there's this famous photo that I always find, so ironic and humorous, is the one of Hawley, because they show two of them. One in the beginning when the protests out there, he's pump fisting, yeah, hey, yeah, whatever. And then when they start coming in, you just see him sprinting for safety. Okay, he was not walking. He said, "Oh, these are my buddies. These are my MAGA buddies." Okay, they're just looking. I'm going to give them a tour of the Capitol. We're going to have a fun time together. He was sprinting for his life. Okay, so that's what was their mood at that point in time. They were running for safety. None of them were hanging out saying, "Hey, these are a bunch of peaceful demonstrators that just want to hang out and watch us certify a presidency." Okay, that's not what they thought. Okay,
I don't think we can speak to their intentions or their thoughts or their feelings.
Okay?
I mean, we can't know for sure what they thought or felt, or there's.
He was. You just look at his face. I watched his face when he was sprinting. His face showed he was running for his life.
Look, I'm not disagreeing. I'm saying
running
we don't know
for his life. Okay,
we can't know for sure what
testimony had from somebody who
the
was
bigger point about January 6th was that we don't know that there's always manipulation to a lot of these things. There's very clear, undeniable criminal activity that took place, but it's easy to look at a lens for, like, right now we could see a lot of the same things. Like, I promise you that there are people on the right that 100% see that in things they're being presented by their side about what are happening, even things like yesterday. I just think it's important to point that out. I think that there's an obvious, undeniable part of that situation that was an operation, that was manipulated. That's not debatable. I mean, it's some of the most verifiable stuff that happened on that day. At the same time, there were things and elements and people involved that were radicalized by things that were being done through those, like by the different groups.
Ryan, I don't. Again, as I was watching, from the little bit that was shared me. Because then, as I was involved in Parler at the time, which I've already said in the past, I saw. I mean, I didn't read. I didn't read most of the content because I didn't really read the content. I'm not a social media person. I don't really have put up a social media account, and I have no interest in being an influencer or any of that type of stuff. I like the kind of conversations that we have with people. I don't want to speak to people I really don't know. I like conversation should be more personal in nature, and I don't want to be restricted to all the limited character limits that you have, to have communication with most people as you get to know them through the things they say. I wouldn't want to have a relationship with them. So, but when the chief policy officer shared with me some of the content to get my opinion, I saw what people were saying.
Can
Okay?
let me
So
comment on that.
I
Let me
don't
comment on
believe
that one point.
I don't believe all these people were set up by all the Proud
I didn't say
Boys and
that.
oath seekers.
I
I don't
didn't
think
say
they're
that.
all set up. We now right now what has been provided evidence is that maybe about 250 or 260 FBI agents were there. Many of the FBI agents appeared after they broke through. So these are not people there instigating
some
riots.
and some not. Some
They
were
were
there
after
before.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And let's think about let's work out the math. Okay.
Wait, hold on.
Trump
I want
said-
to comment on your parlor
Trump said-
comment.
Trump
though.
said there was Trump
I'd
said
like to
there were over a
comment on
million
these things.
people there.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So if a million people were there and there were not 200 agents there during the rally, okay, there were less. Okay. So, but let's assume there were 250 agents at the rally. What's the probability if a million people there that they were going to bump into an FBI agent? What's the probability of that? Okay. It's highly improbable any of them would ever bump into an FBI agent.
Okay.
So I don't know how supposedly people were being manipulated by the FBI agents, but they were not being manipulated by all the things.
I don't know who's saying these things though,
All
Jeffrey.
the
I'm
things
not
the
saying.
Proud Boys said, all the things the Oath Seekers said, all these people that were suing, all the things that they were saying,
Mhm.
okay, that the certification had to stop, that the election was false, that this was a coup, the election, okay. I don't believe that narrative was a narrative that was created by the FBI, okay.
Okay, but who's saying that? I'm not saying that.
I
Are you
don't.
saying that? I'm not saying
Well,
that. So
I'm saying-
let's not.
so-
if we're going to have a conversation about this, let's not make it about the hyperbolic things of the left-right game, right? We can have an intelligent conversation about this, and I think that there's very obvious evidence that there was manipulation. That's what I'm saying. Outside of that, it's debatable about all sorts of different things. If we can agree that there was a level of manipulation, goes back to my first point, then we can consider, without knowing for sure, that there was more than just a bunch of radical people trying to hurt everybody, because I don't think that's the full picture. Now, we can debate about the level to one side or the other, because I can agree with you, as I've said many times, there were crimes committed. There were people there that were just because they thought they should, trying to do bad things. There were also people there that were organized and trying to get people to do so. And I could list off the 100 names that I'm sure you guys have heard before, and we can prove we're part of something larger. My point is nuanced.
I think people being manipulated, okay, people are attempting to manipulate other people all the time. Okay?
Exactly.
At the end of the day, whoever did whatever they did, they're responsible for it.
100%.
You can't blame the fact if they ran across some FBI agent or
I'm
some
not saying that.
Russian agent or some Chinese agent who was trying to propagandize them because they want to see chaos in this country. Okay. If they ran across that, at the end of the day, they are responsible for their own actions.
I've always said that.
So
Yep.
I don't ever want to accept. Whenever I hear this stuff, people manipulated or whatever, I'm never open to that, because at the end of the day, an adult is responsible for their own behavior.
Yeah, but things being
And they don't
manipulated
own
and
their
them
own
acting for
behavior.
their own interest.
They don't
are
own their own
don't
behavior.
exist
They're not
in
an
the
adult.
conversation, right? You can act. You can be manipulated and also be responsible for your actions. These aren't mutually exclusive.
But Ryan,
But they're competing forces of manipulation.
What is ambiguous about a chorus and a sign that says "Hang Mike"?
Yeah, but you guys keep doing this. Look, I agreed with your point. I'm also saying that we can agree that there were things that took place that could speak to a larger event other than those people were responsible for their actions. If they committed a crime, charge them for it. I mean, we're not disagreeing. What's funny is that me pointing out something that we can prove, I feel like you sense that I'm undermining something else. I'm not. Take my word to face
it's
value.
not undermining. I just think, Ryan, we just need to distinguish fleas from elephants, right?
Yeah.
The elephant was hang Mike Pence. Now, there may be some other elements in, and I'm not disputing you, because you're going to get that in any big organization, right? Very few situations have somebody with completely clean hands. But we got to remember the elephant from the flea. The elephant was wanting to kill Mike Pence and being willing to kill him if they got their hands on him, because he would count state certified electoral votes that had survived 61 lawsuits initiated by the Trump people, including before Trump judges. Okay. That's the elephant in the living room, because if we can't go, if that is acceptable, we are back to the law.
Well, so I'm not saying it's acceptable. So I think like the argument feels like it doesn't, with what I'm saying, that sounds like you're suggesting that I'm saying that's acceptable. I'm not, right?
No. I'm just saying in terms of priorities, you have to make we don't have limitless time and resources. So we have to distinguish between the elephants and the fleas in order to save ourselves.
But it's the
Otherwise,
principle,
we're
right?
running after too many fleas.
They
And
broke
all
the
I'm
law.
saying is on January 6th, the elephant was hang Mike Pence. We're going to kill somebody for discharging his constitutional duty to count electoral votes.
Right.
That dwarfs all the other. I'm not denying your point that there are other evils and efforts at manipulation. I'm not denying that. And that's a valid point. But in terms of focus and priorities, we got rid of this idea that you can hang the vice president for doing his constitutional duty.
But the way we started, this point kind of seems like, yeah, I agree with you, right? I mean, I don't think I've ever disagreed with any of the things so far. So, but I think that it's a sensitivity to this conversation. And I think what's important to point out with the Mike Pence point, look, if they did that, which they did, then there should be, this is an interesting conversation, by the way, about free speech as well. Like there's probably today, you say, go kill Mike Pence. Today's reality, I think there's legal things that you could charge him with. I would still, whether it was kill Pence, kill Trump, kill whatever, that the point would be saying those things aren't technically where we should be in regard to the principle on free speech. Hold on.
Wait. Remember, Ryan, it wasn't said on the top of Mount.
I know. Hold on. We're getting away from the point. It's not about Mike Pence. I know. I agree with you. I just felt like including that because we talk about free speech.
I think the hangman Pence is unequivocal because that was an imminent direct threat. These were people breaking in to the location where he was. Okay?
So let me finish my thought. No, I agree with you. I agree with you.
If somebody's in a building and I'm outside the building with an angry mob and I got my guillotine out there and I'm saying I'm going to hang this guy. Okay, I brought my rope, I brought all this stuff, and I brought my mob, and I'm going inside out the building. Okay, I would consider that a direct imminent threat. Okay,
let's just say I agree with you. Let's put it aside.
If somebody goes to your house, Ryan, and starts saying, I want to kill Ryan, okay, I'm out here, I got my rifle, I got my guillotine, I got my thing.
I would argue there's no crime until they commit a crime.
They're out there with thousands of other people, okay, banging on your door, saying, I'm going to hang you, okay? Yep. Would you say, gee, they're just expressing their free speech rights?
Look, today, Jeffrey, if I can answer the question today, yes, I would say that the principle is that they haven't committed a crime until they commit a crime. Now, that may sound crazy today, but I think principle is where it should be. Now, if they kick in my door, if they actually try to hurt somebody, then yeah, they can be arrested for a crime. Collecting on a public sidewalk and screaming things, I do not consider a crime.
No,
but that wasn't my point, though. We're getting mired in the point. What's that? Okay, now they're on my front lawn. If I care, I don't care about that. If they were kicking on my door, I would say something. But look, we're getting mired in this point. Let's just say for sake of conversation, I agree with you. Let's put it aside. I agree with you that the sign was a crime. Okay, different point. My point is back to what we originally started with. The point is that somebody's out there holding a sign about Pence. So if that's a crime and you agree, then charge them with that crime. Getting beyond that, and we're getting into the territory of saying that everybody there is a criminal because that guy had that bad sign. Now, there were crimes. Yes, I've admitted that. My point, though, is that there was a ton, I argue far more than committed crimes that were just present. People that didn't even know what was really going on that wandered in. People that were there for the protest because they believed the government was stolen. All of those things are there. So it's like it's easy to see this lens now looking back on 6, but it's looking at it today, it feels like through the partisan lens, there can be different views of what's happening today. I think we're looking at the same thing in different variations. That you have to understand that, look, let's just take it from Mike Pence. What if that person that was doing that was an FBI agent? It was the one holding the sign, or rather somebody who was working with them and they were there. I'm not saying I know that, but wouldn't that change the reality of how that went down?
Yeah, of course. And if the facts were different, we'd make different arguments for sure.
I understand
that point. But you got to be led. Brian, you got to be led by facts, and we can't.
No, but see, you guys are focused on the Mike Pence point. Put it aside. I agree with everything about the Mike Pence point. My broader point. Let's not get mired in the detail. My point is the bigger point about we know that there was manipulation. Therefore, in a broad sense, we should consider that it wasn't a bunch of raging MAGA maniacs trying to go kill everybody.
I understand, but I think. Listen, I'm not saying that everybody, has the same degree of moral or criminal culpability. But try to think of this analogy. It's not an exact one, but I think it's close. You have the Ku Klux Klan. They're running around and planting a cross, burning a cross on the yards of black citizens. And you join the Ku Klux Klan and you see what they're doing. You see the cross burning and you see the imperial kegel of the Ku Klux Klan. If you stand by them say, well, but I'm really here for something different. Well, you can't be so stupid as not recognizing that your participation in that kind of event
Isn't that guilt by association?
is going to give legitimacy.
I believe that's guilt by association, Bruce.
Right adjacent to you have an obligation to say, no, I don't believe that. Otherwise,
No.
if you're silent in the midst of horrors, you're giving tacit affirmation to what's being done.
Ryan, I have a different point I want to address.
I want to respond to Bruce though, but go ahead. This is interesting to me. Go ahead.
One is the manipulation content. I disagree with that. If anybody's manipulated, it's their fault to be manipulated. Okay?
That's fair.
So I think again that's like a bullshit concept of this person manipulated me.
But you keep saying that like I'm giving them an excuse.
That's for everyone not to be there. The other thing
I'm
is,
not giving a pass.
we all know that the MO, of FBI, when they have groups that they think are a risk, that they infiltrate them.
Right.
And whoever's infiltrating them has to be like one of them, because if not, then they won't be successful at infiltrating them.
I disagree with that entirely.
So that's just a fact. Okay. Now, if we're upset that the FBI infiltrated this group,
if that's all that we're doing,
other groups, then I have no respect for that argument. I don't see an argument.
You said that.
I don't see an argument that says the FBI should never infiltrate any groups. Okay,
I've said that before. Yeah,
because so if the argument is not about January 6th, but about procedures of FBI, then we don't talk about January 6th. We talk about the fact that the FBI should never infiltrate groups.
Different argument.
So that's but if they infiltrated this group, they infiltrated this because there were signs that many people were making violent threats.
Okay, well now we're assuming though. Now we're assuming. We don't know their intentions. We don't know what their plan was. That's probably likely in an honest situation. But now speaking to all the many times we can prove the FBI doing illegal things and setting people up for things they didn't do, maybe that took place. I'm just saying. That's all I've ever said. The arguments that keep getting pointed out are premised on things that I'm not putting forward. I am saying I agree with the general sense. The point is both of those things took place. That's all I'm saying. I think that's the most valid thing we've said so far.
You don't know if the FBI agents who infiltrated were influencing it or going along with the influencer.
I didn't say I knew that.
To not have their cover exposed.
Okay? Yeah, I didn't say that.
I don't know the answer.
I didn't say that. I didn't say I did. I'm the one saying we don't know. That's my point.
And do I think we're entitled to the answer? Yes, I think we're entitled to the answer.
I agree.
I think if there was illegal behavior on here, but what I don't want to have happen, going back to Bruce's comment, I don't want to belittle what happened on January 6th.
Exactly.
By excusing that there was an FBI presence there.
Yeah, but you did it again. I'm not saying that excuses the actions. I'm not saying that the presence
because the FBI.
But I'm not saying that.
Wherever the FBI, yes, considered entrapment.
Okay.
And we should investigate FBI behavior. And they should be investigated, and I support the investigation because, again, I'm going back to comment. I don't believe anything anyone from government tells me. I assume everything they say is a lie, and everything they have the obligation is to tell the truth.
Then, by that point, we should be considering that the FBI is lying to us about what they're doing there.
No, but I think
they're doing anywhere, not just there.
I agree.
Anywhere.
We agree.
Ryan, remember this, and because I agree. Entrapment is a legitimate defense, and everyone, over 1,000 who were charged with crimes, had an opportunity to prove entrapment as a defense. And I agree that ought to be available. But we have to have a system where we accept some finality. And that system is a court system where you have impartial, independent judges. And you rely upon that process, even though it's not perfect, but it's better than all the alternatives, to put the matter to rest. And there hasn't, and there wasn't until Trump pardoned everyone involved in January 6th, a single case, not one, where a defendant proved entrapment. But they were entitled.
Again, this is the same argument, guys. Look, I'm going to pick this for the third time. I'm not arguing that these people being manipulated in some way invalidated the crimes that were committed. I don't know how many times I can say that because the arguments keep getting put forward as if what I'm saying justify. I'm not saying that. So I don't know. It almost sounds like we're all in agreement, except the difference is
you are making a claim that many of them were manipulated.
I'm saying I think that's possible. Is all I've said. I'm not saying we know. That was my point. That we don't know
and I guess if they think they were manipulated, I would assume that they were told that to their lawyers, and the lawyers would have pushed for discovery on, look, this wasn't my idea. I was manipulated. I want a full discovery process. And if the government has exculpatory information that it might be hiding, I want that revealed in the trial. I mean, that's
so now the point is that if it didn't come out in trial, therefore it's not possibly happening. I mean, these are all
no, Ryan, this is where I think, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a disagreement. Ryan, I'm a lawyer, so I know, Ryan, the law is imperfect. Even in courts, you can get it wrong, right? I know that's true. But compared with alternate ways of coming to conclusions, they're all vastly inferior. And so even accepting, the court ruling as definitive means there are going to be some cases where they make errors. The number of errors is infinitesimal compared to trying to get to a judge reality without the court procedures where you have right of cross-examination. That's my only point. The law is not perfect. It has
we agree on that. Yeah.
Human beings are imperfect, right? And so you shouldn't destroy the law because it's going to make some errors. You just have to acknowledge, and because there are going to be some errors, that means there's going to be some injustice. Ordinarily, we hope it's random. It's not fixed on whether your skin color, your religion, your ethnicity, or anything like that. But there are going to be errors, and there's going to be injustice.
Yeah, we agree.
But the alternative is so much worse than the disease. You shy from it.
I would likely agree with that.
Brian,
yeah, I don't know.
I will make an additional comment to Bruce's. Okay, I had a lawyer and a think tank approached me after January 6th. And of course, they thought I would be very sympathetic because of, what happened to Parler after January 6th. And I was sympathetic. Okay. So I said, I agreed that under a certain criteria, I would fund cases. I would fund the legal defense of January 6ers. Okay. So the think tank was looking to raise money. They had hired a lawyer. The lawyer I got to know a little bit because this lawyer was active in Parler and would contact me and was in direct contact with me, with making suggestions and stuff like that. So it was a lawyer that I knew working with a think tank that the lawyer introduced me to, and thinking that, and so I said, I'm willing to write checks, but I'm willing to write checks only until I review the cases. So we're going to have a meeting where you're going to send me the files. We're going to discuss them together, because if I think this person, is in it, or the law is abusing them and they're having charges that are completely disproportional to what their acts were, then I will, if they're sympathetic in a way that I find them sympathetic, okay, I'll fund the whole legal strategy. Okay, I can tell you that they presented a bunch of cases to me, and after a bunch of cases to me, after my questioning, the evidence and the files and stuff like that, that the lawyer that was defending them agreed that none of these were really sympathetic characters. So, and I asked these questions. Were they, you think many of them were put up by an FBI agent? Do they have anything? Do you think the government is holding information out? If that's the case, don't worry. I'll give enough money so you can make all these files and stuff like that. So I was very interested in helping, but I wanted to help people who I thought were worthy of me writing a check to help them. So, and after my conversation with these people, they said, and I can't say that was completely representative of everyone, because they weren't representing everyone, but they were representing a decent sample of the people who were doing it. And at the end, even they acknowledged, look, at the end of the day, I guess you're not going to fund anything, because really, we can't tell you that any of these people are really, good actors. So, but my intention was to help. I wanted to help. I wanted to find people I could write checks. I wanted to expose government abuse. That's why I wanted to help. If I thought I could have exposed government abuse, I would have written a check. Okay.
Well, you could point out how many people were there and how many people that represents. That's the point you already made, though. It doesn't represent the full picture. But my point would be, just go back to the way we started. We were talking about what was going on today, and January 6th got referenced. My point was, well, let's not forget that there was manipulation there. Everything else came from that. So think about everything we just talked about, and what my only point was that there was not some kind of a measurement, not some kind of just to be clear. That's all I actually think.
I'm rejecting your statement, Ryan, and then let's move on to another topic. But I only want to say there's manipulation everywhere. So
Yeah,
it
but
doesn't,
that's not
it,
fair.
should, it
That's
shouldn't,
not fair.
it shouldn't,
No, no,
it
no,
shouldn't,
hold on.
it
I have to
shouldn't,
push
it
back
shouldn't
on
need
that.
to be, it shouldn't need to be mentioned in this context. In everything, there's
Yeah,
manipulation.
no, but that's not fair, Jeffrey. That's not fair. You can point to somebody like Ray Epps alone and acknowledge the reality of somebody genuinely trying to organize, to coerce, to manipulate people, to take action that could be used against them. I could point to people that were proven representatives of left-wing groups that were there pretending to be MAGA, trying to get them to take action. I can prove that there was a representative, a person who literally worked for the Azov movement, shouting things in Russian, connections to Israel. I can go through all of this if you really wanted to sit down and listen to it. My point is that there was, beyond some broad everything's manipulated, deliberate government manipulation that took place on January 6th. I'm happy to go through it all in a point. That's a provable fact. So knowing that, it should be considered with every time we mention January 6th. The only point I've made. It's all based on facts. Happy to move forward.
Good. I gave you the last word, so now you got to make the last word on something we disagree on. Okay,
well, thank you.
Let's move on, because I want to, before we go, I want to answer some of the questions people submitted.
Okay.
So the first one is for Bruce.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court is deciding whether to change the Voting Rights Act. How could this affect elections? So.
Well, unfortunately, there's a little bit of background here. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 did not have, Section 2. It didn't come in until 17 years later, with which created, in addition to intention to discriminate on the basis of race being illegal, an electoral practice that had, quote, resulted in discrimination, was made illegal. It's a very elusive standard, because it seemed to me on its face difficult to argue that if you're permitted to vote irrespective of race and your vote counts irrespective of race, then how can you be discriminated on the basis of race? You got the same vote as anybody else. But putting that aside, and then in a 1993 case, before this Section 2 was interpreted, the Supreme Court held racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional under the 15th Amendment. Racial gerrymandering is drawing district lines for the purpose of trying to pack persons into one district because of their race, based upon the premise that all whites and all blacks think alike, which I think is absurd. Thurgood Marshall is not Clarence Thomas. Booker T. Washington was not W.B. Du Bois. I think it's insulting to say skin color means you think alike and the same. Anyway, the issue now that's confronting the court is that there have been some interpretations of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that's entered the equation in 1982 that have authorized some purposeful racial effort to draw boundaries to ensure what you might call majority-minority districts. I think there's a vast overstatement of what the political significance is going to be. When this case called Shaw versus Reno said racial gerrymandering was unconstitutional, I know at the time everyone said, well, all blacks are going to be eliminated. They can't win anymore, because the only way that they can win races is packing minorities into certain districts. We know that's not true. Barack Obama didn't win because of gerrymandering. Kamala Harris didn't win vice president because of gerrymandering. The 5 blacks who were in the Senate didn't win because of gerrymandering, because they all run statewide, right? And that, in fact, despite the unconstitutional holding that racial gerrymandering was taboo, black representation did not diminish. I think that if the court holds, and I think they will hold, that Section 2 cannot authorize racial gerrymandering that's otherwise prohibited by the 15th Amendment, I think the consequences will be small. I think that the political consequences that are likely to be much larger will be this current inclination of legislatures, both on the left and the right, to do redistricting before the 10-year new census and to try to manipulate the districts based upon political gerrymandering, which the Supreme Court said is not subject to judicial review, in order to change the outlook. That may mean that some states may produce more Democrats like California, some more Republicans like Louisiana or Texas. I don't think that it's going to be a watershed for either party, no matter what comes of Section 2.
If the courts can discriminate, if the courts allow discrimination for some based upon political party, why can't they allow any other reason for discrimination? I mean, this is a logic I don't accept.
Well, the reason is because
I can produce a district where I know most people will vote Republican, so I can make sure that I can that the legislature can if it's controlled by one party, the legislature can gerrymander district and redistrict in a way that diminishes the voice of the minority party. That's okay, but they can't do it based upon other reasons. That seems to be the worst reason. I mean, the worst reason seems to be the fact is that we were founded as a country that said one of the worst evils is partisanship in parties. But the Supreme Court thinks, with all the warnings against political parties, that it's okay to gerrymander to strengthen a political party. That just doesn't seem to be really. Do you think? It just doesn't seem to me that that's what people would think.
No,
that is a faulty principle. That we think legislatures, that when they have the majority, they should be successful at being tyrannical in the application of the majority, so that they can disenfranchise people, so they can get with a small majority, or maybe even a minority. They can actually control the state legislature without even getting a majority of the people in their state voting that party. I don't see how the courts can legitimize, that type of.
I have to confess, as an attorney, I wrote a very long monograph saying political gerrymandering was unconstitutional. It was for the Republican National Committee at the time, right? So
we knew it, Bruce.
But the difference, if I'm a lawyer, I don't really, eating my words, at least if you're looking at constitutional text, the 15th Amendment singles out race as different than other characteristics for discrimination, right? You would have to, political affiliation would get in a little bit under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. And that's the court relies upon that textual difference. I don't believe that it should make a difference in result to say why race is different. That's all I can say.
Well, has gerrymandering always been a part of the reality of the way that, how is that even legal in the first place? It feels very manipulative, whether it's race or politics, and how they can constantly,
It came from Elbridge Gerry. It began very early on. Elbridge Gerry was at the Constitutional Convention. He was a Massachusetts statesman and politician, and gerrymandering began with Massachusetts because it looked like a salamander, because you would draw these very odd shaped districts for political purposes. So it's been around for a long time. I mean,
it's been criminal from the beginning.
In some sense, we inherited it because the British parliamentary system, they had these rotten boroughs. They had some districts, you would have 3 people in them. They would send somebody to the parliament, and London would have the same number of representatives with 2 or 3 million citizens there. So unfortunately, it's been around for a long time, but I don't want to overstate its importance, because if you look at statewide races like the Senate or governors, where there can't be any gerrymandering because everybody gets to vote within those boundaries, which are fixed, you don't find a dramatically different political representation in the cases where you have statewide voting as opposed to district by district voting. I don't want to downplay it, but we don't want to exaggerate it either.
Well, what about like New England right now? That seems to be a big focus everyone's pointing to, and just based on like the population, like the argument is like, look at all this blue or look at all this red, and why isn't it all Republican? But if you look at the actual population density, it's obviously predominantly around the border. So that made sense to me. But do you have any insight on that? Because that seems to be like a huge partisan point right now that's been circulating.
Well, I think, both parties do this. In Maryland, they gerrymander. In California, they did. Well, California had an electoral commission, but they're trying to go back to do more gerrymanders to respond to the Texas midterm redrawing of districts to try to create more Republicans. But I think my view is really what Jeffrey has said. It's illicit. It's not a constitutionally illicit purpose to draft a law for the sole or predominant purpose of favoring a party because of their political viewpoint. I just say, and that's the end of the matter. If you can show that the purpose was driven by this ulterior partisan motive, I think that's automatically out. Mm-hmm. What constitutional value is advanced by that goal? Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has not accepted that idea. But again, I go back to say, I think if you look at the results in statewide races, they're not dramatically different from the district-wide races in terms of not only the racial, but the political outcome. It does have an impact, but I think it's more at the margins than is oftentimes believed.
Yeah, I have another question here. Here's another question, Bruce. How can we expect a corrupt court system to right the wrongs of the other corruption? The Supreme Court has made some terrible decisions.
Yeah. No, I think that it's a wonderful question. And I think the question really answers itself. The court is not going to be our salvation. The court has never been our salvation. It ultimately is driven and bows, to the prevailing orthodoxies, the public opinion. It can put speed bumps in the road is at best. And we know that the only thing that ultimately can save us, because the court will follow public opinion, is us, is what Jeffrey said. It's up to us to have our imprint and our ideas and argue this is what needs to be. We are not silenced because there's a precedent against us. Precedents can be wrong. We think that not because necessarily we're impugning the motives, but people can make errors all the time. And so the question is, it's us, the people who are on this program. The people are the three people here speaking to you. We are the ones who have to make the case. Peaceful advocacy, courage, not backing down, but not demonizing, vilifying our opposition. Hey, expressing homage and admiration for our ancestors who wrote their death certificates, their death warrants, so that we could live free.
Okay. I want to expand on that statement, Bruce. Okay. The people who, if there were political parties that emerged subsequent to the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the signing of the ratification and signing of the Constitution, of the people who were at the Constitutional Convention, it's fair to say that that group of people, especially at the Declaration of Independence, because that was unanimous. Okay, everybody signed who was there. Okay, they probably represented different parties, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had different political ideologies.
Yes.
So parties formed, they would not all be affiliated with the same parties and have the same opinion of what the role of government is and on all the issues. Okay. Yet there was one thing there's one thing they did coalesce in support of. They supported the Declaration of Independence unanimously because they were supporting people's inalienable rights, and those inalienable rights were independent of political ideology. So they agreed to a certain principles that were completely independent of government, or political ideology. These were just said these are rights that everybody's entitled to, and there's not a legitimate government if it doesn't respect those rights. Then we had a constitution where we had most of the people supported the Constitution. A few people decided who were at the convention that they refused to sign. They didn't want to go along because they didn't think some of the rights were respected. But at the end of the day, a lot of the people signed it. Most of the people signed it, and they got a majority to sign it. All people who were not necessarily associated with the same political ideology. Okay, Hamilton and Jefferson clearly had, and Madison clearly had different political ideologies, but they all signed that document. They all agreed that we should construct a constitutional order. Okay, they all consented to that, even though they had different political views about the role of government and the role of the country in the world. Okay, so they disagreed on that, but they agreed that there was a certain procedures and consensus methods they were going to go through, because the first thing they were concerned about was protecting people's liberty. And the second thing is, how can a government have some degree of being able to function, while remaining limited in nature and never being a threat to people's, individual, liberties and their inalienable rights. Okay. So this seems to be a pretty simple principle. Okay. So then we had, Ben Franklin go out, and the people said, what kind of government did you give us? And he said, it's a republic if you can keep it. So Ben Franklin didn't say it's a republic, the president will keep it for you. Ben Franklin didn't say it's a republic, the courts will keep it for you. Ben Franklin didn't say it's a republic, Congress will keep it for you. Ben Franklin said it's a republic. So we have a whole bunch of other questions here that all relate to how democracy has failed and all politics are corrupt and things like that. You know, I think if people read our founding generation, okay, they all expected that if we were not vigilant in defense of liberty and freedom, that government would morph into something totalitarian nature. Yeah. So if we sit back and say democracy has failed, if people want to use that term, or a constitutional republic has failed, okay, it's failed because, as Franklin warned us, it was our job to keep it, okay? The moment we decided to delegate that job to the government itself, to sit back and say, we got all these rights, we got all this liberty, we got freedom, please keep it for us, okay? So we're going to elect you to do the job for us because we don't really want to do the job ourselves, okay? So we don't want the trouble, okay? I want to go to work, I want to come home from work, spend my time with kids, watch a little entertainment, relax a little bit, you know, spend some time with friends. This is too much effort for me to keep my liberty, okay? So I don't want to put the time and effort into doing it, okay? That's the reason why, in my opinion, we have failed, okay? We have failed because it's up to us to keep the republic, not Congress, not the president, not the courts, us, okay? And that should be independent of ideology, okay? We should be as intolerant as of any breach of the Constitution, whether it's done by a friend or an enemy, an ally, or somebody who we feel different with, okay? Any breach of the Constitution is a breach of our inalienable rights, okay? It's a breach of our freedom, and we should each prize and value it, okay? More than anything else, okay? And unfortunately, we do not. And that's why this system has failed. The system relied upon a vigilant people, okay?
And I want to, Jeffrey, I want to point out this is not, fantasy land, because I saw, and kind of showed my age, we witnessed the people insisting on the Constitution. It's called Watergate. It's called the reaction to the Saturday Night Massacre. It's called forcing the most powerful man in the world to leave office for crimes against the Constitution that pale in comparison to what we're witnessing today. Obstruction of justice, manipulating agencies, and defying subpoenas. It worked. The American people, I was there. There are tens of thousands of Western Union telegrams into Congress and the White House protesting the firing of Archibald Cox. There was defense of the courts. No, you don't dare defy a court order. And everybody was engaged in watching the Watergate hearings, whether it was Haldeman or Ehrlichman or John Mitchell. And the country was magnificent at the time. And we all felt, a sense of electrification. We saw Richard Nixon, August 9th, 1974, the helicopter out of the White House lawn. You're no longer president because we can't trust you with the stewardship of our liberties. That's where we were 50 years ago. So I want the audience to know it can be done. The people's voice can be heard. And remember, this was an individual who in 1972 won 49 out of 50 states, over 60% of the popular vote, and 520 electoral votes. He had that mandate, and yet he was gone in less than a year and a half, because the American people said you don't get to shred the Constitution of the United States. So I don't want to have anyone think, oh, it can't be done. It was done as 50 years ago. All that needs to be, and so we know it works because it worked in Watergate. When that investigation began, oh, poo-pooed, you'll never get impeachment. Why are you doing this? But then we had education, people had engaged, and there we had the Constitution. It was it's the finest constitutional hour I have ever personally participated in my long life.
And wasn't there a meeting in the White House where Mr. Conservative?
Yeah, Barry Goldwater, Hugh Scott, John Rhodes. They went to Mr. Nixon and said, "You need to leave. You have no votes." And Mr. Nixon left.
What party were they?
Yeah, they're all Republicans. Barry Goldwater, Hugh Scott.
Was
and John
Goldwater a
Rhodes.
rhino?
Yeah. No, Barry Goldwater was never
Was he a
accused of being
socialist?
a rhino.
Was he a socialist? Was he Antifa? I mean, so was there any doubt to his credentials as a Republican?
None whatsoever. Of course,
So-
our audience needs to know
what
he
did,
was.
what did Goldwater choose? The Constitution or Nixon?
Yeah, he chose the Constitution. Remember, Goldwater was the Republican nominee in 1964. So, and then he served continued service in the Senate. So he wasn't a kind of a pale pastel Republican. He was a hard-nosed Republican from beginning to end, and yet he understood, no, this is not acceptable. And that's 50 years ago. That's what we can do again. It's just up to us to make it happen. I have to apologize. I can have time for one more question if there's there, Jeffrey. Otherwise, I got to move on to another Zoom.
No, because I knew you had to move on. I asked the questions that were most, pertinent to you about those. Is there any other thing you want to mention about the Supreme Court calendar that you'd like to mention to the people before you go off?
Well, I think the real test will be, if the court is going to even play a speed bump role, they will soon have argument on Mr. Trump's tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And if the court punts and gives away the game to Mr. Trump, then I do fear even the last speed bump. And it's either us forcing Congress to act or we're no longer, the Republic now will be off of life support.
Okay.
Or we go ahead.
Ryan, can you stay around for some of the questions that Bruce has to go?
Okay. Listen,
Yeah.
sorry. Okay,
No
I've
worries,
got to
Bruce.
go now.
Good talking,
Thanks.
Bruce.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you so much,
I've only
Bruce.
got maybe another 10 minutes, but yeah, let's get into some of them.
Okay, some people have a lot of concerns about currency debasement, inflation, stagflation. What would be for people who have those types of concerns? Some people about fiat paper money, the Federal Reserve. Some questions also been a reference to the facts is that a lot of the power that Jews have is associated with the Federal Reserve, and they're controlling over the financial system, and that maybe a way of dismantling that power would be dismantling the Fed. So I had a whole bunch of questions on these type of
I'll jump on
topics.
those two.
So
Well,
why don't you? So I thought you would enjoy answering.
Yeah,
some
let me
of those questions.
jump on the first one. The inflation point. I mean, I'm sure everyone's going to have a different opinion today because a lot of this is really hard to prove and verify. I think we're at a point, though, for a long time where whether it's the manipulation of the currency itself, the manipulation of gold and silver prices, that we are in a really bad way in that regard. And I think my personal opinion is to go hard in the direction of sound money, to go in the direction of peer-to-peer exchange. It's just, some people, it seems so archaic and out of the way. I think that's the way the world goes. And I think that as they're shoving us into a digital currency with CBDCs in large places in the world, but in the United States, a stablecoin version that's way worse. I think that's the answer, at least in the moment, to kind of lean into that direction. My point is that inflation at this point, I don't even know how, even with the stock market, you'll probably have a better thought on this, Jeffrey, but I'm just so completely pulled away from it because I know how much it's manipulated and how it's not what it maybe once was. And I just think that there's so much gaming going on in that I think that sound money is the obvious direction. To the Fed, first point, Fed in general, I think the Trump administration, like they're doing with a lot of these points, is trying to feign action towards things that they know we want because there's already like Bruce points out, the solution that's going to be way worse than the problem is already lined up. That's the only reason I think they're kind of pump faking that direction. To the point of the Jews' influence over it, my opinion is always that what we're taught, either that person somehow thinks this religion is somehow entirely in, worldwide control over these dynamics versus a Zionist political organization that is 100% taken manipulation of these through governments. Now, there's points to be made about Jewish, religious, rather Ashkenazi overlaps going back a very long way. But my point today is the point I think they're referencing is getting mired with the idea of a religion, which I think is a distraction. I think the point is Zionism and the political organization has infiltrated a lot of these things, including governments. But the Fed point, who is manipulating to what end is a good conversation to have. I think it's a lot of multiple factors to it, but again, ending it entirely going a different direction. That's what I would argue.
Yeah. For me, I think it's unimportant to blame, any individual group. I think what we need to focus in on is how do we create mechanisms under which nobody is successful at having, that type of
Exactly.
influence.
Right.
So the first problem is, to me, is government is too big. Okay. So there's less interest in manipulating something that doesn't really have of great consequence. So our first failure is if so many people are spending so much money to influence policies and politics, and campaigns, people who run campaigns can raise hundreds of millions of dollars for presidency. We can spend $1 billion invested in running for the presidents. Why are people writing checks? They're writing checks because they want to have access,
Right.
because they know the access has a lot of value.
Yep.
So, and why does that the access have a lot of value? Because the government does a lot of shit. Okay, we can forget that for the first 130 years, 20 years of this country, okay, federal government and total government was very small. Okay, we spent about we spent globally about 3.5% of GDP. Okay, small amount as opposed to right now the government spends about 40% of GDP, federal, state, local levels, and then regulates almost everything else. So back then, we lived in a pretty much permissionless society. Now you have to ask permission for everything. So the more government has either direct or indirect controls, the more incentive there is to corrupt people. And there's more profit associated with having that type of power. That power comes with a lot of perks and privileges, so we should really be focused on the fact is that we're creating the incentive for corruption. The more we have government do, and the more the government is in the business of picking winners and losers, the incentive is for people to write checks to be a winner and not a loser. Okay, so that's just common sense. Okay,
Right.
Logic and common sense. We should all, if we're concerned about government corruption, there's only one way to end government corruption: shrinking what government does, shrinking what government asks, what we need government to ask permission for. If we don't have to, if we have to think about like why are people, writing these checks for the ballroom or for the inaugurations and all that other type of stuff, and maybe the Trump arch, that he wants to build. Why are they writing these checks? They're writing checks because they need his permission for a lot of things, and they know that they're not likely to get the permission if they don't write a check. Okay, so the cost of getting permission is writing these checks. Okay, so, and of course, government likes the fact, if I'm running for Senate or Congress, the more power I have, and the more power I can have to help certain people and hurt others, then I go to people and I say, look, I'm head of these committees. You want a good outcome, write me a lot of checks, and I'll help you if you help me. Okay.
Right.
So we've corrupted the system by accepting an expanded government. Okay. We've corrupted the system by accepting to be an empire and determining, as what Ben Franklin's warning was, if we choose security over freedom, then basically we'll end up with neither security nor freedom. And we've either forgot that, or never learned it. So I think a lot of it is that the government is known that if they promote fear, the fear will have a sacrifice of liberty and freedom in return for a sense of security, but it's a false sense of security. And that's been very successful to grow. So I think if really you want to end the influence of the state, and then if we want a big government, people talk about currency and fiat paper money. There were some questions. I question whether, given the fact that I think some people already made the comments, in some of the questions that were asked about a corrupt Supreme Court. I think one of the most corrupt decisions the Supreme Court made was validating the issuance of fiat paper money,
Right.
because the Constitution is quite clear on its definition of money. It's
Yep.
very, very clear and explicit, and it's backed up by the comments that every founder, including Alexander Hamilton, even though he wanted a national bank, okay, at the end of the day, they all understood the threat of the debasing of money. Okay, they would not think that debasing of money, that you create a government entity that has a right to oppose a legal tender law, and that create a monopoly on money, and then then after creating a monopoly, how anyone really can think that that was the intention of the founders. I know Ben Franklin made the statement, says that maybe if the English did not impose a corrupt money system on the colonies, there might never have been an American Revolution. That's what Ben Franklin said. Others said that if you embrace fiat paper money, tyranny is inevitable. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So,
Well, see, just to add to the point is that, the way, rather a solution, I would say, is not to say get rid of it all. Like I would argue that personally, but again, people can do, the point is to be able to transact in whatever way they want. The only reason that's a problem for government is what Jeffrey said, is they want to be able to control what you can do. That's where CBDCs is just a further version of that problem. Like just be able to exchange gold or my t-shirt for your food. It doesn't matter, as long you can have the fiat dollar there if that makes it more functional for like a central society, if that's what you want. But the stopping of us being able to say, here, I give you my shoes for that service or whatever it is one more step of control. And when we get to the digital version, that's what we keep. That's what a lot of us are saying, is that'll be where there's no coming back from that. That's hopefully
and think about how it facilitates and subsidizes government growth.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
What you have
They
is
have to be
financial
there.
repression. The government lowers interest rates so it can issue debt at its own cost. And what the government says, don't worry about how much money we spend, because we're going to keep cutting your taxes. We'll keep shrinking the tax base and cutting your taxes while we keep spending money. And how are we going to fund it? We're going to print money, and we're going to pretend that printed money is all making us all wealthier and creating these liabilities. They're actually assets, not liabilities.
Right.
And so it's selling people on the free lunch. So I think fiat paper money. I think if James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were around today, I think they would say this is unconstitutional. I have little doubt that they would think that it's unconstitutional. So I think there's a case that it is unconstitutional money. I think there's a better case that it is unconstitutional, that is constitutional. But I think we had a corrupt course that decided that, especially during the Civil War, when the government didn't have enough gold to fight the war and needed to issue greenbacks, that then the Supreme Courts wanted to validate the decision that was made to finance the war. So basically, it's a validation of the fact that fiat paper money is money to support empire and wars. Okay,
and right there is an example of the dehumanization, right? So you have an issue where the solution is to do something that might be unconstitutional, but it's because the other side's a problem. That goes back as far as you want to look. It's happening today.
So for me, that's why as I've said a number of times, that's why I'm a Bitcoiner. Okay, Bitcoiner has the attributes that I think people should desire in money, in the fact it's not corruptible. Okay, people cannot change its policy from one day to the next. There's no permission required. You get to maintain a sense of privacy. Well, the government strips it from you by forcing you to go through exchanges that you listen. But the whole idea of it initially was it was peer-to-peer. And if you do it on a peer-to-peer, if you're moving it from one wallet to another wallet,
Which
I
you
mean,
can still
the only time you lose your anonymity is if you move it to a wallet who has a disclosure obligation.
Right.
So the government
People don't
wants
know
to
that.
surveil us. But if you can pass it to people in the type of transaction that doesn't need to be reported to the IRS, then you can reserve your anonymity. If you're doing it to a person who doesn't have a disclosure obligation by just transferring it to somebody else, then the government doesn't have to know. But the government wants to create a disclosure obligation on almost anything that we do. So they want whatever form of money to be something that they can surveil. And I think what makes unique, many things that make unique Bitcoin, but one of the things that I think importantly makes it unique that most people don't talk about is that it's clear in looking at this writings of Satoshi and Satoshi's correspondence that one of the objective functions of Bitcoin was to be anti-fragile with respect to the government. Okay. Other currencies have not been designed with that as an objective, okay? And because most of them are busy trying to lobby to become approved by the government. They're happy to be part of the surveillance state, so that's why I differentiate. I don't like this, including Bitcoin under the conversation of crypto. To me, there's Bitcoin, and then everything else is a shit coin. And People might embrace shit coins for different reasons, but all those shit coins are coins that want to enter and cooperate with the surveillance state, with the state itself. They want to be friends with the state. They want to influence the state, and they want and to me, their principles are no different than the financial system's principles, But ultimately, I want to leave it for the people to decide, which is why, I don't believe you have to. I support ending the Fed, but I think the first step, should be people pushing for, the abolishment of legal tender laws. As Ryan said, is let people choose what they think is value and when they're exchanging between people. And if people accept, the government should not care what people accept as a viable form of money, as a viable form of currency, as a viable form of an exchange that whatever two parties enter into on a voluntary basis, the government should not have an opinion on and force it. And the government should not force us to adopt their money that they issue, to pay things to them. The government should not require us to use, as long as there's fungibility, as long as the government can take whatever form of value we give them and convert it to whatever they want to hold. That's all the government should care about. The government should care about that we have deep markets where whatever people transact in can easily be converted into something that we want to hold. Okay. So as long as the cost of converting what somebody wants to give us into what we want to keep is cheap, okay, then nobody should care, and that should be the goal. That should be the goal, is to minimize transaction costs for all financial transactions. At the end of the day, if somebody gives us something that we're indifferent to what people give us, as long as we can convert it into something that we want to hold at a value we want to hold it for. As long as we feel that's going on, we should be completely indifferent to what people have. And that should be the goal. The goal should be no permission, no permission required from the government, that we get to choose ourselves, and the government has no rule in that process.
Yeah, it's just self-responsibility, right? If I choose to enter an agreement with somebody and accept something that I end up regretting, that's on me, right? That's the thing, is a lot of people want to look to some power to be like, that guy tricked me, or he lied about what it is. It all comes down to self-responsibility, right? It's a tenet of actual self-governance and, something beyond the government structure we have today. But I do have to get running. But I want to say, Jeffrey, that I really, I love having in-depth, intelligent conversations, like that end amicably, even about things we disagree on. And I just want to say I respect you a lot for being able to, we can have a conversation about things that we obviously disagree on and still be able to have an amicable conversation. Like, that is something that I praise every single time in any interview that I have or discussion, because it's just so rare today. That people can have different opinions and walk away going like, I'm looking forward to talking next time. It just, isn't that rare? Like, it's so frustrating to see how few people embody that. But, thanks again for putting this on. I enjoyed the conversation.
And I let you have the last word.
Well, thank you for that. But it was a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Yes. So, and one day, if you want to have a deeper conversation about all the evidence you think that's a topic we should have. Yeah. Any information that you have that you think is important for the public to know, I want you to feel free to share it on this show. So
I just felt like it wasn't the time, because we'll get into like a 3-hour conversation about nuanced points, but I would think we should. I think it'd be a good conversation. I also want, Bruce is the one that we want to hear from in the show. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's got the knowledge base. And so that just kind of takes it away from it. But yeah, I mean, I really do enjoy the dynamic. I really think it's important to get down to the meat of these things. And that just didn't feel like the time,
But I think one thing, and I know you have to go in a second, but I think the one thing you and I probably strongly agree on is, and I don't want to speak for you, but if I think it was up to both of us, at least I'll speak for myself, the FBI wouldn't exist. The CIA wouldn't exist.
Exactly.
Okay.
100%.
So we would not need to have this conversation, because these entities engaging in these activities, you and I do not support.
Exactly.
Okay? And we would abolish these entities. So and we would abolish them for exactly the same reason. We think they're evil. We think they pervert. They're perverse in nature.
Unconstitutional.
Okay?
I would agree with that.
And unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So whatever arguments are about, whatever their role in any day, so that ultimately on policy, you and I are in complete alignment. We don't want these entities to exist. We think they pervert rule of law, not enforce the rule of law. Okay. We think that they are there to sustain, this corrupt power structure. Okay. And that we would definitely abolish them. So
Yeah.
you and I are completely aligned, on that issue, and we both probably would agree that they probably have committed a lot of criminal acts.
Oh, yeah.
And that we should be suspicious of everything they do.
And I'll add too that I'm sure that the more we continue to do this, I'm sure we'll find points even at governmental discussions that we'll disagree on. And I look forward to having that conversation. I think it's good to flesh these out because it arms us as well, like for other conversations to be more in tune with what our nuanced opinions are. Because most people have headline conversations today. You know what I mean? Like they don't really have so again, I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stay on just for a few minutes because I want to cite other comments people made so I can share them with anybody watching. So
Okay. I'll see you guys next week.
You have to go, and I'm just going to just share a few more comments that other people made.
See you guys. Have a good one.
Hi, I'm just going to stay just for a few more minutes just because I want to share the other people. One comment is AIPAC money gets people elected. They're not picky about color or party affiliation. One thing I and someone who is Jewish. I do think that AIPAC money is too influential. I think all PAC money is bad. I think all PAC money corrupts politics. I would remove all PAC money from politics. I've already advocated that I think the only money that that politicians should be able to accept are from individual voters, people who have a right to vote. If people don't have a right to vote, they shouldn't have a right to influence the process. Only people who have a right to vote should influence the process, and there should be caps on on how much any individual could contribute to the process. I have a very strong opinion of that. That might not seem to be so liberty loving. And probably inconsistent, with my liberty views, because I don't believe in any government, but to the extent that there is a government, I don't want money to be able to influence government. I think money is so corrupting of government, and we got to get money out of government, and so I think the only way to do it is this corporation should not have personhood. PAC should not have personhood. If the only people that should be able to contribute to a campaign is a voter, and they should only be able to contribute to candidates that they're eligible to vote for. So for local elections, only the people who live in those jurisdictions should be able to give the politicians, and I don't believe in this, these game playing with this issue ads that aren't really issue ads. They're really they're just really an arbitrage around not being able to give money to the candidate, or the facade that PACs and candidates don't really cooperate and communicate with each other. So there's easy ways to signal without being considered, colluding. I think it's I find it really repulsive, and I think that I think in these current times, especially when we look at us aiding and abetting Israel committing genocide, I think it's not a very proud moment, for the United States that as you see these photos today of the Gazans returning to their homes, and still having aid withheld from them, and really not returning their homes, they're returning to rubble. The infrastructure was completely annihilated. How anyone could take a look at those photos and not say this is genocide? How are people going to survive if all the infrastructure was wiped out? And they don't have food, they don't have water, they don't have potable water, they don't have a structure to live in, they don't have structures to send their kids to school, and they don't have structures to send people in for for hospital treatments. I mean, basically, this is such an act of inhumanity that the American public were made parties to, because of the Jewish influence, in the White House. I can't say, I don't want to indict every single Jew, because not every single Jew was supportive of Bibi Netanyahu, nor supportive of Trump and these policies. but for those who did support these policies, and they had enough influence, to basically go out and basically condemn on college campuses that basically anyone who spoke out against this genocide as branding and labeling them as terrorists and Hamas supporters. And I think if you take a look at the damage that Hamas can cause Jews and Israelis versus the damage Israelis can cause to Hamas and Gazans, there's definitely a disproportionality there, and that they should not be judged by the same standards. It seems to me right now with Israel, doing more violence against Gazans and holding up some of the aid, they're looking for any pretext to do that. So I doubt that Hamas has 100% control over all the various groups, in the region. They probably lost a lot of the ability to have control and influence over the entire region, because the form of communications, has been decimated. So I think that I think that maybe there are groups that beyond their control, maybe not, and that any of them to wipe out more people. It's inhumane, and Israel could not have done all this damage without the support of all the weapons that we have provided Israel. I don't know why Trump has not taken the same attitude towards Israel as it taken towards Zelensky. Russia certainly is likely to be a greater threat than Hamas is. Yet Trump will not provide Zelensky weapons to do damage to Russia, but he's willing to provide Israelis all the weapons to do everything that they have done in Gaza, which clearly, in my opinion, is genocide. Clearly, in my opinion, these are war crimes, and we are aiding and abetting war criminals, and that makes us as bad as the war criminal, that we're giving them the tools and instruments to commit, their crimes, and I think the American people should be very ashamed of their country, of our country, for funding and aiding and abetting a war criminal. Very, very sad moment, in my opinion. Another comment made was the West pretends to believe in democracy, but sends the CIA, UN, etc., around the planet to subvert it. We pretend to believe in elections, but then support dictator Zelensky. The world wants peace and prosperity, not endless war and poverty. Truth, not lying. Mainstream media. Minsk, Minsk II, Istanbul. The West breaks all its promises. I'm okay with Russia giving a kinzad to each of the Euro brats and sending them directly to hell. They certainly deserve it, and it would make a spectacular ending to their century of wars. That's not a comment that I have some sympathy for, and others not. I don't believe two wrongs make a right. So I think that's like a principle people should learn, from nursery school, that that you don't use one person's wrong as an excuse for your own wrong, because then you just escalated. You wrong me, I wrong you, you wrong me back, I wrong you back again, and it becomes a cycle of mutually assured, destruction. Somebody has to be the peacemaker, and I don't know who knows if we'll see peace if we. I don't know if you get peace through appeasement, so I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if really appeasing Putin here will actually produce peace. So I think the only way we will have peace is for people who respect liberty and freedom. I think if people don't respect liberty and freedom, I don't think you're likely to get people to have who don't believe in those concepts. Because once you deviate from liberty and freedom, then you're embracing coercion. So you're forcing you're getting your will through force. So if you have to get your will through force rather than reason, that's not the foundation for peace and prosperity. Okay, the only thing that's a foundation for peace and prosperity is liberty and freedom. Okay, and respecting everybody else's liberty and freedom like you want yours to be respected. So I think that's the only chance we have as a human race, is to really embrace as a universal principle, is that, you know, I respect your liberty and I won't trespass on your rights and you don't trespass on my rights. So as Madison said, you know, I have property in my rights and rights in my property. I think until we as a species embrace that principle, you know, we're not going to see as much peace and as much prosperity. So I think that's our only hope, you know, not looking ill on the people who you think have done you wrong. So I don't think that's we got to learn the difference between justice and vengeance. Another comment, politicians are criminals for bankers, communist American and freedom. So yeah, I do like to call bankers banksters. I do think it's a criminal class. I think there is a partnership between politicians and bankers. America is certainly not a communist country, but it's not a capitalist country either. So we abandoned capitalism, in my opinion, in 1913. We completely abandoned capitalism. And why do I believe that's the case? It's because in 1913, we got the income tax, we got the Fed, and we got the direct elections of senators. So we basically weakened state rights to strengthen central authority. So we gave the government the ability to print money. We gave the government the ability to tax its people, you know, and exert more influence over who's part of the Senate. So that process would be not determined by the interests of the state, but we would now nationalize, you know, essentially Senate elections. So I think all of that to strengthen the federal government vis-a-vis state governments. And I think, you know, that's the day, that year the Republic died, that year capitalism died. And what occurred shortly after 1913, you know, a few years later, we entered World War I. So we began morphing from a nation of sovereign individuals into an empire, and it's going to take us to reclaim being a nation of sovereign individuals. Again, nobody will do that for us. So I'd just like to conclude thanking everyone who submitted questions. Some of them I haven't answered specifically. I've tried to answer generally so that I cover the topics that people asked questions on, and I'm always going to encourage to hear your voices. So please submit your questions, submit your comments, and next time, hopefully, I'll do a better job of spending more time on them. And I apologize for not doing as good a job as I should have done in giving more time to air out more of the questions and comments made. Next time, I'll do better. So thank you, everyone, again. Have a great day, and I appreciate you joining this conversation. Bye.